Good morning. Oh, very loud. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's Planning Development Control meeting. My name is Councillor Therese Evans, and I am the chair of the committee. On my right is Councillor Jane Rutter, who is the vice chair. Also here we have Julie Pinnock, who's the service lead for built environment. The title changes all the time. And Daniel Lucas, who is our legal advisor today. And Lorna Hutchings, who doesn't have a title. Planning manager. Then at the other end of the table, we have Matthew Watson, who is the Democratic Services lead. All the councillors are sitting around the table and they have their names in front of them. Most of the important information was on the screen as you came in and in front of you, but I'll just repeat the headlines. Please turn your mobile phones off or onto silent. If there is a fire drill, we're not expecting one, then please follow the instructions given to you, and the assembly point will be in Abbey Gardens. This meeting today is being recorded and is live streamed and will remain on the council's YouTube website, and there are subtitles available. Members of the public, if you are speaking, then you will see that there are public participation phones. It doesn't matter which one you choose. There is a button at the bottom, which when you press comes red, and that means that that microphone is live. So, have I forgotten anything, Vice Chair? Hope not. So we move then to the first application. Oh, no, we don't. We go through the agenda. Apologies and deputy members.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. We have one apology today from Councillor Cunningham, who's been replaced by Councillor Horrell. Chair.
Thank you. Any disclosures of interest? Councillor Rutter.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare on item 10 that I have a close personal connection through both being members of Hebburn Wylly Parish Council of the principal objector, and therefore there may be there's a distinct possibility of perceived bias, and therefore I will be withdrawing from discussing that item and leave the room until the next item. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have a declaration of interest, not prejudicial. I have known the representative of Bishop's Waltham Parish Council for some years, but obviously have had nothing to do with this application with the Parish Council or spoken about it. Then the minutes of the previous meeting. Oh, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. I also have a personal interest in this because I'm a City Council representative on the CPRE Planning and Policy Board, but I've not discussed this. It was done in a separate committee, so I wasn't involved in that.
A personal interest, not
personal interest only, yes.
Minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Rutter, you took that meeting as chair.
Yes, Chair. I would like to ask members if those minutes are agreed. Thank you.
And then the next item on the agenda, number 4. Could we accept the update sheet as an addendum to the report?
Agreed.
Members, it is quite long. It was emailed to us last night, so make sure that you've read all the details. And we move now then on to the planning applications. And we start with number 6, which is 21/01391/FUL. And it is a solar farm at land at Locks Farm, Botley Road, Bishop's Waltham. The case officer is Stephen Cornwall. The case officer always sits over on that microphone. And we also have Robert Green, who is there to assist Stephen. So, Stephen, I believe you are going to give the presentation.
Yes, I will, Chair.
Thank you.
Before I start, Chair, I'd just like to make a slight correction to the update sheet. There's a typo on the additional informative number 15, which at the final line, instead of the word closest to the nearest noise sensitive property, it actually should read farthest away.
Thank you.
Chairman, we've got in front of us this morning a planning application for a renewable energy scheme. The proposal is for an 18 megawatt capacity, reduced down to 12 megawatts alternating current for export to the grid. Submitted to the local authority July 2021, when it was first consulted, and there was a second consultation stage undertaken in May-June 2022 to reflect the changing circumstances, which members will see is identified in the description relating to the proposal potentially affecting right of way and affecting the setting of a listed building. There was also substantial further information submitted at that time. This plan shows the application site. It lies to the southwest of Bishop's Waltham, south of the Botley Road. The application site, which is identified in red, consists of 5 agricultural fields, totaling 34 hectares in size. I'm just trying to move the cursor to identify where the fields are. The area in blue is the remainder of the farmstead that the host farmer would still retain. So the applicant wouldn't have any interest in the area identified in blue on this plan. The next plan I'm showing identifies a number of environmental constraints within this area. The red stars show the listed buildings, and the most notable one we need to take account of relates to Locks Farm, which together with the granary building in the grounds of that property were listed grade 2 after the application had been submitted. We've also got what's referred to as the Deer Park and the Park Lug, which is the green line running in a U shape around the application site. And the area identified in yellow is the nearest proximity of the boundary to the South Downs National Park. In terms of giving members some idea of dimensions, the national park boundary at this point is 700 metres away, and the Park Lug feature, which is the green feature, to the west is 490 metres away from the application site, 460 metres to the south, and 624 metres to the east. Chair, this plan shows the application site and the 5 fields which we've referred to in the report with the numbers 1 to 5. I think it's useful to show that the strong vegetation that surrounds the application site and also divides the fields up at the present time. Whilst I've got this plan up, I'll also take the opportunity of referring to the yellow area, which is the top section of the traffic route, the proposed traffic route for construction vehicles. And I'll also use this plan to point out to members the distance walkers would have to travel on the Botley Road if the permissive footpath, which is part of the submitted scheme and would run down the new access road, if that permissive footpath didn't exist, and I've calculated that there's a distance saved of some 400 metres of avoiding walking on the Botley Road by the presence of the permissive footpath. This plan shows the general application site and the arrangement of the panels. The application indicates there's in the region of 53,000 panels. They would generate sufficient energy to power 5,500 homes for a year. The area of panels are divided into two. There's basically an eastern and a western section, which is surrounded by fencing. The main support infrastructure is occupied or is present in field number 5, adjacent the field boundary between fields 4 and 5, in the alignment north of the pylon, which I've identified with the, sorry Chairman, I'm not sure members can see where I'm identifying on the cursor. Through the centre of the site, there's a proposed, the footpath which splits the site would obviously remain, and there's a proposal to establish a wildflower meadow on the western side, sorry, on the eastern side of the footpath. This plan shows a close-up of the arrangements for the new access and the visibility display. The introduction of the new access would involve the removal of 55 metres of hedgerow, of which 40 metres are then replaced. Visibility displays are provided of 111 metres to the south and 138 metres to the north. Members will note that there have been objections to the degree of visibility displays being offered, and that element is covered in detail in the report. Members will also note the orange diagonal area, which is a triangle towards the bottom of this section of the roadway. That's the area proposed to establish a construction compound under permitted development rights. This is the point in the farmyard where the proposed roadway would enter the farmyard. And this is a plan showing the further section of roadway, which would then link the farmyard down to the water feature and across the stream. There's been an adjustment to the position of this roadway to ensure that the root protection areas of the trees which lie to the east isn't impacted by the construction. This is a photograph of looking down the field towards where the bridge would be installed. This is a photograph from the field to the south of the water feature, looking back towards the position where the bridge would be established. And this is an indicative drawing of that bridge. The bridge itself comes in sectional pieces and will be erected on site and would have a 45-ton capacity. This plan shows the eastern area of the layout, consists of fields number 4 and fields number 5. Members will note it's already crossed by a number of power lines. The infrastructure, which are in the cabinets running down the boundary of the hedgerow, which I referred to earlier, the there's also the connection point in this field, which is at the northern end in the middle. And in addition to the cabinets, it's also worth pointing out there are a number of what are referred to as string converters, which are small box-like structures attached to the ends of the rows of panels, which also performs a function of altering the power output. This is the western area and refers to areas, or rather fields 1, 2 and part of field number 3. Field number 3 would now be divided off with the installation of a new hedgerow along the eastern side of the footpath. Members can see in larger detail the wildflower meadow that I referred to earlier. Both the areas of panels are secured using 2.1 metre high ear fencing. It's also important to note that there are 3 metre CCTV poles established at 50-metre intervals around the security fencing. These CCTV cameras would be angled along the fence line and obviously intended for off-site security. The site itself isn't manned, it's operated and controlled remotely. This plan shows the typical boundary section. It identifies what we've referred to in the report as the exclusion zone between the existing vegetation and the proposed fence line. Some of the conditions imposed require the fence to be installed at the very beginning to secure that the area between the fencing and the perimeter vegetation isn't used in any way and protected. The panels themselves, which are 5 metres inside the fence line, would be a maximum of 3 metres tall at the back side. The panels themselves, as members will be familiar, are angled, fixed in a south-facing direction. This slide identifies the mast feature, which is one of the elements of infrastructure located in field number 5. It's 15 metres tall, and this is a typical size of the buildings to be installed down in the site. The buildings or structures range between 2.3 to 3.5 metres tall, and they would be finished in a colour that has to be agreed with the local authority. This is a slide of the indicative landscape master plan. This is a new slide. The original one that was circulated did show the battery storage compound, which is no longer part of the scheme under consideration. The scheme includes major enhancement work, including the planting up of gaps in hedgerows, 270 metres of new hedgerow, new scrub areas, wetland planting, a new pond, bird and bat boxes, and the calculation in terms of biodiversity net gain is the proposal would have a 22% increase in habitat and a 47% increase in hedgerow. Members may recall that we have a policy relating to biodiversity net gain. The government guidance, which is planned to come into force this November, would have a 10% increase in BNG. The landscape enhancement work would be secured through the conditions. There's an intention for long-term review of the enhancement work with a 3-year rolling period of review. And as part of this scheme, the applicant has agreed to fund the local authorities' costs in participating in that review process. This plan is a close-up of the features in field number 5, which would be located adjacent the hedgerow to fields 4 and 5. It's inserted so that members can appreciate the relationship between these structures and Locks Farmhouse, which is the listed building identified in the star on this plan. And it's in this position that we stood yesterday during the site visit. Just to give members some indication, the pylon mast, which is the turning feature where the overhead power lines change direction, is 248 metres south of the farmhouse. So the following slides look at the issue of the setting of this listed, or the two listed buildings, and the proposed development. This structure that can be seen in this photograph is what's referred to as the granary building, and along with Locks Farmhouse has been listed grade 2. This is a photograph taken from the southern face of Locks Farmhouse, looking down the garden. The boundary to the garden is the post and rail fence that members can see in the foreground. The vegetation, excuse me, the vegetation which lies on both sides of the watercourse. The intervening area between the post and rail fence and the vegetation is also in the ownership of Locks Farmhouse. This photograph represents the winter visibility from that property towards field number 5. And this is a closer view taken at the bottom of the garden, leaning over the post and rail fence. This photograph was taken from field number 5, looking down the boundary that I've referred to in previous slides, where the items of equipment would be installed. You can make out part of Locks Farmhouse through that vegetation. Part of the scheme and the intention through the landscaping would be to further reinforce that boundary feature. This is a photograph towards Locks Farmhouse taken from the middle of field number 5. The following photographs are looking at more distant views of the site. This photograph was taken from Cops Hill, which is at a distance of some 670 metres. It's taken from a position on the Allen King Way footpath, which is at a high point in that footpath, some 170 metres south of where it starts from the Botley Road. The application site, if members can see the cursor, is this land through the trees. Members may be able to make out where I've got the cursor at the moment, which is the existing solar farm that lies to the east of the proposed solar farm. This photograph was obviously taken in the summer. This is a photograph taken from the footpath FP13 on entering the site at the southern end. The footpath crosses this field, so in the future the proposal would be there would be a hedgerow to the left-hand side, and then there would be panels beyond that, and to the right-hand side up to the existing field boundary would be the wildflower meadow. This is a photograph along the northern boundary of field number 3, which is showing what is considered to be typical boundary vegetation to the application site. A strong hedgerow with individual mature trees. This is a view of the proposed access taken from the Botley Road. Members will note in the report references being made to what's termed valued landscape, and it's the area of ground beyond this hedgerow in the field running down to the the watercourse. That comment has been made particularly from CPRE. We've assessed that issue and it's dealt with both in the report and also in the update. So this is a photograph looking east along the Botley Road. This is a section of road that I referred to earlier, where walkers, if they wish to get onto footpath FP13, have to navigate to get to a safe point where they can then leave this road. This is a view looking west from the proposed access point. There's a footpath that comes up from the former railway line, which is part of the Pilgrim's Way. It emerges onto the Botley Road adjacent this white coloured property. And this is a photograph taken from standing in that lane, looking out onto the Botley Road. You'll see there is an element of view of the application site in the middle distance. This photograph was taken in the summer months and you can see the straw bales in field number 5. That's the pylon, if members can make it out, again in the middle distance for reference. This is a photograph taken from the point where footpath 13 leaves the Botley Road and drops down towards Locks Farm Yard before continuing further down to the application site. The application site is lying in this shallow valley in the middle distance beyond this tree line. This is a photograph taken from where footpath 13 actually starts off Curdridge Lane. The application site is in this middle ground, well screened by these existing trees. The black lines that members can see on this plan identifies the extent of the application site. This is a copy of one of the photographs submitted by the applicant following a request from the National Park in their first consultation response for further detail. The applicant undertook further assessment of the potential impacts from the National Park and presented a series of photographs, and this is one of those put forward. Again, the site is in the middle ground in this photograph, not showing up against the skyline, but set in a context of the wooded landscape. Chairman, that concludes the presentation. The recommendation in front of members is to approve the application subject to the completion of the legal agreement. The details set out in the report. The conditions are set out in the report, plus those adjustments set out in the update sheet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cornwall. We move now to the public speaking. And first on the list, I do have 2 names down for the objector, Emma and John Rosling, but I think Emma has gone. Oh no, he's still here. So if you'd like to come forward, you have 3 minutes, which you can share in any way that you want. But at the end of the 3 minutes, I have to stop you, I'm afraid. The clock in front of you will indicate the time. And you need to press the button at the bottom of the microphone so that the red light comes on. So when you're ready.
I'm speaking today representing families who live surrounding the site, some unable to be here because of work commitments. Whilst this is a renewable energy scheme, policy guidance is absolutely clear that the need for renewable energy does not automatically override environmental protections and the current adopted local plan. It's clear that the issue is one of planning balance. On one hand, we need to consider the climate emergency. Uncomfortable as they are to read, academic studies, most recently from Cranfield, show that some UK solar farms can actually add to the carbon burden of the planet. No calculations for lifetime carbon savings have been provided, despite this being requested by the Council in July 21. It really matters for future generations that major decisions this Council make are evidence-based and not just wishful thinking. On the other side of the planning balance are the cumulative harms to landscape, heritage, people, the national park and biodiversity. Lots of questions about this scheme remain unanswered. Why the applicant has chosen to site the most industrial elements of it in such close proximity to the listed buildings and refused to consider amending the scheme in any way. Despite noting that this is a sensitive landscape type, why the Council's own officers are taking a different landscape approach between this site and the one at Lovedene, it's legally important that Council policy is applied consistently. Why the applicant has not reduced the number of panels now that batteries have been removed, as the export capacity is limited to 12 megawatts. Why they have not adopted the recommendations of their own heritage officer to remove some or all of the Fields 4 and 5 from the scheme. Currently, the application is contrary to the Planning Act and local heritage policies. Why they've not addressed the concerns of the National Park that the scheme will erode its setting. Removing panels and infrastructure from Fields 4 and 5 might help. Why the applicant states this is a well-screened site when, as you saw yesterday, the topography means it will be very visible for those surrounding the site and footpath users. Why they have not moved noise-generating infrastructure further from residents as recommended by the EHO. In not addressing these questions, the applicant has been disrespectful to the Council's own officers as well as to local residents. We just cannot understand why the applicant wrote to us deeming it of no merit to meet with the neighbours, to see the impact for themselves or to discuss any possible mitigation options. In planning, it's an important foundation that local opinion is considered. Nobody supporting this scheme lives close to the site. 80% of local comments are objections. Unlike Winac, local residents have focused on policy rather than social media to drum up support. This applicant is not a statutory energy provider. It is a commercial application by an offshore-based investment fund. And the landowner does not live on site, so will not be living surrounded by industrial infrastructure and noise. The local residents strongly feel that the scheme in its current form does not meet the requirement that the potential benefits outweigh the clear cumulative harm identified. With too many questions remaining unanswered and no mitigation options offered, we ask you as our councillors to refuse permission at this time.
I have to stop you there. Thank you very much. It could be that members of the committee have points of clarification they want to ask you. No? Oh, Councillor Edwards.
I should like to ask you to say a little bit more about the phrase you used, statutory energy provider. What do you mean by that? And are there statutory energy providers with a different status to this applicant that you would find more acceptable?
Well, a statutory energy provider, in my opinion, would be the National Grid or SSE, or one of the people that actually provide energy. This is a private commercial company in the same way that you might have a private commercial investor. It's not the National Grid have not said we want power at this place in this time.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Horrell?
Thank you, Chair. Could I just clarify, normally in these situations, it's always good to talk. And are you, just to confirm, despite your request to have conversations with the applicant, that has not happened to try and improve the scheme and come to a better solution? Could I just clarify that that did not happen? Thank you.
We wrote an email to the applicant after they submitted their initial planning application, and they said we had a meeting arranged, which they cancelled at last after they'd seen our first objection, which we had to get in because of the deadlines that are imposed. And they said that they had no merit in meeting us. They deemed it of no merit to meet us, and they would only deal through the LPA.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Councillor Rutter?
You were talking about the equipment that makes the noise. And there's a new informative on our update sheet which requests that that any noise emitting infrastructure should be sited furthest away from the nearest noise sensitive property. Do you think that that would solve that issue that you're concerned about, or not?
So the applicant has provided a paper-based, a computer-based model to measure the noise. It doesn't accurately measure low frequency noise like the electrical humming. The EHO recommended that to have more confidence in the assessment provided, it would help if the equipment was located further away from the residential properties, but no amendments have been made.
Thank you.
And Councillor Rutter mentioned there the update sheet, and that is available for benefit of members of the public. That is available on the City Council's website to view. Any further questions for the Rosswell? No. So thank you very much indeed for coming along. So the next public speakers are the two parish councillors. So I don't know if you want to come up individually or together, doesn't matter. Yeah. And you have 3 minutes each. So you're Mr. Ogden, are you, from Shedfield Parish Council?
I am it.
Mrs. Wood, did you want to come up and? Yes. But you have your own 3 minutes. Yes, you do. So sit where you wish.
Yeah.
Right.
Good morning, everyone. No one is against alternative energy, including solar panels. Everyone here today would agree. However, it has to be in the right place. The application is for a solar farm on good, fertile land next to the River Hamble, not a stream, not a puddle, the River Hamble. And the valley has very good views. I've walked that footpath on many occasions, absolutely fabulous, apart from one effect where they left the ball in the field and I had to run away, but never mind. It is a difficult subject. Even the government keeps changing its mind. At present, the indications for small nuclear plants. These do not suffer from instability or verbal output. We do need solar farms, but we also need land for feeding the population. The officer recommends approval to this committee, but it's up to you today to decide. If you refused it and the applicant were to appeal, just let you know the guidelines for the Secretary of State on various appeals. Planning practices guidelines advises that local topography is an important factor in assessing whether large-scale solar farms could have a damaging effect on the landscape. In this case, it clearly is. And that great care should be given to ensure heritage assets are conserved in a manner appropriate to their significance, including the impact of proposals on views important to the settings. In this case, it is again. And also, the need for renewable or low carbon energy does not automatically override environment protections. This is all detailed in previous appeals, where the overall balance, the harm caused to landscape character and visual amenity is decisive. These reasons have been highlighted time and time again by the Secretary of State in various appeals. I hope that you did enjoy your visit to the site. You will see how great it is. Putting a £55,000 solar farm is not good. There's no mention to the adjacent solar farms. These now have a significant visual impact on the amenity. Adding it to will further degrade the area. The application is overdevelopment on the solar farms in a very, very small area. If approved, it will make one of the largest solar farms in the whole of Hampshire. Just to finish off, In our parish, the solar farm is placed on a recycling centre. In Wickham, a very large solar farm is planned on another recycling centre. It seems very questionable to have a site on a very productive farmland. We are a small country and we need land to feed ourselves. It's time for change. Solar farms is part of this, and it has to be in the right location. This is not the one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ogden. Could be that the committee have questions, clarification for you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Ogden, for your presentation. So I was looking the right way. You referred to the land itself as being a good agricultural land. The land is actually graded at 3 and 4, which is exceedingly low grade land. Walking up there yesterday, and yes, I did enjoy the visit. My wife will enjoy the washing afterwards. The trousers were totally mud. I'm not quite sure what you can actually grow in this particular element of land. There appears to be a lot of clay subsoil.
Well, I've walked it in the winter, in the summer, and various other bits and pieces, but it is classified as a 3B moderate farmland, which is good quality. It is for predominantly cattle. You're looking at cattle, we don't need cereals all the time. Whether that can be converted to cereal land, I'm not a farmer, but I'm saying to you, it is one of the most luscious fields and area in our whole area. The places where they put the other solar farms on are literally, I would call them all, brownfield sites. And that's the way to go, in my opinion.
Any further questions for the parish council? Councillor Hurrell.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask you to clarify? You said that there were other developments, and yesterday we saw one development alongside Field 5, and I believe there are others in the area or proposed. But could you just clarify what you were intending for us to understand in your speech? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually did run out of time and I cut my presentation. That is the field, that is the plan of all the adjacent solar farms. The officer hasn't actually listed all the solar farms that are actually in existence. I was going to present this map to every single one of you today, and I run out of time in relation to that. So it is really, really super extensive. 53,000 more panels in this area is devastation. Thank you. Again, Madam Chairman, I can leave these for if you want to have a look at these.
Thank you, Chair.
I'd need to check on the legal status of that map. Yeah. I think the legal officer is saying that we've walked the site, so yeah. And I live very close to the area, so I'm aware of the other farms.
There's 3 farms. There's 3 farms.
Solar farms. Yeah.
3 solar farms, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? No. So thank you very much for coming along today and giving the parish council's point of view. And now we come to Bishop's Waltham Parish Council, Councillor Wood. It might be better, Mrs. Wood, if you start perhaps facing us so that we could.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And the microphone is on the end one, but you don't have to use that one if you don't wish to. Oh, it's gone off. So, Mrs. Wood, you are representing Bishop's Waltham Parish Council.
That's correct. Okay. This is a planning application that the Bishop's Waltham Parish Council has spent many hours considering. We looked at all the impacts on the nearby locality and the wider environment.
the Bishop's Waltham Parish Council joined Winchester City Council in declaring a climate emergency in 2021. This planning application for a solar farm has the positive attribute of being a source of renewable energy, but unfortunately has negative impacts on some of our residents due to its size and location. When this application was first presented in June 2021, Bishop's Waltham Parish Council objected due to the lack of important information that was necessary for consideration, such as a thorough noise assessment. Subsequently, a renewed application was presented with significant changes and many more studies and consultant comments. We considered all the reports from consultants and specialists, such as the Environmental Agency, Environmental Health, the Landscape Team, WINAC and the Archaeology Historic Team. Many of these reports suggest conditions to mitigate against the impact of the scheme on the immediate locality. We recognise the objections of other specialists. Historic Environment expressed concerns but refer to paragraph 202 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2021, which states that a proposal that leads to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, such as the 2 listed buildings in the vicinity, should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. In the view of the significant need for an increase of renewable energy sources in the world and the temporary nature of this scheme, Bishop's Waltham Parish Council support this application, but request that the mitigating measures within the various reports are conditions of any planning permission to lessen the impact on the immediate neighbours and locality.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions of clarification for Councillor Wood? Councillor Rutter?
You mentioned that you wanted conditions to mitigate impacts. Have you read the report that's come to us? Are you convinced that the many conditions that are in our report do offer that security for neighbours and for the landscape?
We felt that they did, yes. We looked at all of them. Visibility is a strong thing, but if the biodiversity in the hedgerows, etc., added to, we felt that it wouldn't be seen from a distance.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Horrell?
Thank you, Chair. You indicated you thought this was temporary, but 40 years is the scheduled life. Is that the definitive view of the Parish Council, that 40 years is a temporary setting? Thank you.
It is described as a temporary structure and the land underneath it will be returned to its normal state. So we were trying to weigh up the view of all of our residents against the views of some of the nearby residents. It was a very, very difficult thing to do.
Any further questions? No, thank you very much, Councillor Wood, for coming along today. We move now to one of the ward councillors. As it affects 2 different wards, there are several ward councillors, and we have Councillor Malcolm Wallace, who's representing Central Meon Valley Ward. Good morning, Councillor. And when you're ready, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, I represent Central Meon Valley, which is adjacent to the planning application. Right, the UK's energy policy states that if we're going to get prices down and keep them there for the long term, we need a flow of energy that is affordable, clean, and above all secure. We need a power supply that's made in Britain for Britain. The UK government's British Energy Security Strategy, published in April 2020, has the aim of increasing solar energy capacity 5-fold by 2035, from 14 gigawatts to 70 gigawatts. The proposal before the committee today is for an 18 megawatt solar farm, enough capacity to power 5,500 homes, and represents a step towards that energy security. The strategy goes on to state that we will continue supporting the effective use of land by encouraging large-scale projects to locate on previously developed or lower value land where possible. As may be expected, for a proposal of this magnitude, a lot of concerns have been raised, covering a variety of issues, including the location, access to the site, and about the listed buildings. As part of the application and in response to these concerns, the officers have prepared a detailed review of the application. And no objections as part of that review. No objections subject to conditions were submitted from the archaeology officer, the ecology officer, environmental protection, glint and glare analysis, landscape officer, flood authority, highways authority, public rights of way, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service, and Southern Water. No objections were received from the tree officer, from the Environment Agency, National Grid, or Natural England. And the proposal was supported by the sustainability officer. Obviously, it's now up to the committee to decide whether the responses are suitable and appropriate, but from my point of view, there's no reason to overturn the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wallace. Don't go, because there might be some questions of clarification for you. Are there? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. The concern of the local residents is the continuation line of solar panelling. What are your views on that type of installations, where one continues on from another? Sure.
Yes, so there are, as I'm sure the officer, planning officer will explain, there are, and you've seen for yourselves as part of the visit, there are this will be the third solar farm. There are two smaller solar farms on the site already, or in the area already. I think those have all been considered as part of the response that you've heard from the parish councillors previously.
Thank you very much. And I believe in the report there is a consideration of the what's the word I want? Cumulative effect of the other solar farms in the area. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. No more questions? Is that right? Yes. So thank you very much, Councillor Wallace, for coming along today. We now move to the supporters. And we have two supporters who are sharing the 3-minute slot. So James Jameson, who's the agent, and Bill Gunyon, who's speaking on behalf of Winchester Action on the climate crisis. Gentlemen, have you decided how you're going to share the 3 minutes?
Yeah, yes,
thanks, Chair. First.
Yeah, Bill first.
Yeah.
Follow on. Thank you.
Okay, so when you're both ready, put your microphones on. So that one's gone off. And
thank you.
3 minutes are yours. Yeah, sorry.
Good morning. As the long-standing technical partner of the City Council on climate policy, WINAC strongly encourages you to approve these amended plans for Lochs Farm. Plans have the support of Bishop's Waltham Parish Council. Only 12 individual households have expressed objections on the planning platform, outnumbered 3 to 1 by expressions of support. For those of you uncomfortable with greenfield sites for solar, we have to observe that this single smallish solar farm generate more electricity in any given period than all the rooftop solar that has ever been installed in our district in the 2 decades since this technology came to market. Maths tells us we have no choice. Your current review of the district's carbon neutrality action plan has highlighted how your ambitious climate strategy has so often been frustrated by the constraints of central government. These plans offer a rare opportunity to exercise your authority to deliver real progress for local policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We're grateful for WINAC's scrutiny of this scheme. Good morning, councillors. We have nothing to hide, as explained at the community engagement event we undertook in the summer, following which the Parish Council voted unanimously to support this application. This is a suitable site for a solar farm, some poorer quality 3D land. It's not in any designations, it's not an evaluated landscape, and if it clearly didn't comply with planning policy as alleged by objectors, I don't think we'd be at this stage with strong support from the officer and consultees and a robust officer's report. That report itself notes that at the first consultation there were 37 objections from 28 households, 5 letters of support. At the second consultation we had 30 objections from only 11 households and 40 letters of support. This reflects an increased awareness of the need to increase the country's supply of renewables in light of international events since we submitted the pressing need to tackle climate change. An objector at the engagement event acknowledged that only a small number of people near the site experience any noteworthy impact, and since September, when third parties were last written to by the LPA, only 1 household has continued submitting objections. So the small number of households on the community concerns document received doesn't seem to accurately represent the community. So to sum up, the council have declared a climate emergency and democratically adopted a clear net zero pathway. That notes that only 16% of the district's power comes from renewables, and the proposals would be a valuable addition. There are substantial local benefits which are at risk of being missed out on if the application is refused, including powering the equivalent of 5,500 local homes, enhancing domestic energy supply, substantial biodiversity enhancements, including a 2-hectare wildflower meadow along the footpath, information boards, a landowner who's happy to facilitate school visits and similar community events, a new permissive path, funding for the LPA to monitor ecology enhancements, economic benefits secured by skills and workplace employment plan. I'm happy to clarify any queries you have and clarify any information that's been provided this morning which you might not understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well timed. Members, any questions? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Right at the beginning, Emma Rosling, one of the local residents who was speaking on behalf of the local residents, indicated that there was not the communication that you would have expected. Was there a reason for that from your point of view?
The ways of approaching community engagement are obviously highly subjective. We approached local residents directly by writing to them. I remember distinctly because I wrote the letters on my wedding anniversary. And I was surprised to receive, or pleasantly surprised to receive, an email response from one of the other neighbours the very next day on a Saturday. We exchanged some emails with 2 or 3 of the nearby parties. Unfortunately, whilst we were making some arrangements to potentially come down and visit, pretty substantial, the first of numerous substantial objections were received, and it seemed clear that there's a great difference in opinions between us at this early stage of the application and the household in question. This is actually the smallest project we're working on just now with the lowest impacts, and we have to work out what's a proportionate approach. And in this case, we were very pleased to engage with the Parish Council, who initially objected. We took into account their objections, we took into account the members of the public's concerns, amended the scheme in a number of ways, specifically by changing the inverter technology we're proposing on the site to reduce the noise impacts. And then in July last year, I presented, it wasn't a Parish Council meeting, but I presented at an event in Bishop's Waltham and took questions from members of the public for about an hour and a half. And then a week or so later, the Parish Council voted on the proposals and, like I say, unanimously and democratically decided to support the scheme. So I think it's about unfair to say there hasn't been any community engagement. And I would also point out we submitted the event during COVID restrictions, so it's a bit more difficult at that point.
Forgive me for saying so, Chairman, but this is one of your smallest applications, but it's a very large effect on the local residents. And I think that should have taken a little bit more priority in my mind. Thank you.
Members, any? Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. If we refer to page 106, we've got a drawing that shows the height of the fence, 2 metres, but then the solar panels appear to be much higher than that. Why is that?
Well, the height of the panels as submitted is 3 metres. That is standard height. We find that panels end up being deployed at a slightly lower level, typically about 2.5 metres, but we apply on the basis of 3 metres to take a worst case scenario and ensure we're assessing the impacts robustly and taking a conservative approach. The deer fence, as a 2 metre high deer fence, is just the standard specification for securing solar farms. Initially, or 5, 6, 7 years ago, it used to be a metal sort of palisade fence, and that's now changed to be a wooden deer fence of approximately 2 metres in height.
Yeah, I'm comparing it to solar panels that I've seen in other sites. What would be the angle then? Because I'm interested in the reflective light.
The panel's angle, I think we've applied based on 25 degrees. That may well be fine tuned, but I think the drawing shows 25 degrees. The officer may well have the drawing there. Can't quite recall specifically, but I think it's 25 degrees from memory.
So the other point is that what is the design life of the panels you're going to use?
Panels themselves can last for 40 years. That ties in with the application timescale that we've applied for. Maybe that some or all of them are replaced at some point during that 40-year period, but they can produce power for 40 years.
Okay, and you've got the mountings going into the ground. You're proposing to remove the complete.
Yeah, everything that we've applied for would be removed in due course. I think the decommissioning statement and document would include consideration of retaining some or all of the biodiversity enhancements and landscaping enhancements, but all the physical built development, piles, access tracks, structures, foundations, panels, cabling, fence, etc., would all be removed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rutten.
Thank you, Chair. The conditions are extensive and ambitious, I think. Can you give us complete confidence that they will all be met and that, you've got the sort of infrastructure in place to support everything that's you're planning to do, the school visits, the signs, everything else? And can you just talk to me about any other projects that you as a company or that you know of are doing, and whether they are similarly linked into the community in the same way and are enhancing biodiversity and so on, or is this a special case in terms of the actual level of conditioning that's coming with it? Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, I mean the conditions are detailed, but the nature of the conditions is very similar to the conditions on all of the other sites we work on. Typically a landscape and ecological management plan, biodiversity management plan, construction environmental management plan. These in name are standard documents, and in this case the content of them, some areas will be more detailed or less detailed than others. It depends on the site specifics. All the sites that we're working on just now that are approved or in construction or are operational have a similar suite of documents. The applicant, Next Energy, has an extensive kind of corporate social programme. They're happy to facilitate and engage with landowners on community outreach initiatives. I think the benefit we have on this site is that the landowner is very engaged and is keen to, as a retired ecology lecturer, is very keen to hold her feet to the fire, and she has told me that they'll make sure that we deliver on what we've said in these documents. Ultimately, it's bound by a planning permission with a range of conditions, with no interest in undermining the good work we do on other sites by not delivering on this site. And I think the biodiversity side of things, the applicant is very keen on. As an industry generally, solar farms have led the way with environmental protection measures during construction, but also ensuring that the biodiversity net gain, which is very generous in solar farms, way exceeds the 10% requirement that's going to come into play in November, is generally exceeded on schemes. And I think the other thing is that under the Environment Act, there will be a 30-year requirement for biodiversity measures to be carefully managed and supported throughout the lifetime of development. But obviously, we're proposing that over 40 years with a well-funded suite of reviews that the LPA will undertake every 3 years.
And could I just ask about the cost of decommissioning and whether the solar panels themselves are going to be able to be reused in some way or recycled, and what provision you're making for that?
So there's a commercial agreement between the applicant and the landowner, of course, and that requires full decommissioning. If for some bizarre reason the applicant built the scheme and then decided to walk away from it, the value of the steel and the panels and the cable, etc., in the site is substantial, tens of millions of pounds. That wouldn't just be left in a field to abandoned. Essentially, that would have a substantial value. That someone would take an interest in removing and reusing or taking over. The panels themselves, elements of them can be recycled, reused. We're at the start of, most solar farms. No, that was actually yesterday. Has a solar farm ever been decommissioned in the country? Not to this my knowledge, because we're at the start of this new way of producing power. Some wind farms are starting to be decommissioned, and that sort of industry is building up and mobilizing to work out the value and how we can reuse turbine blades in the different parts of those components. And I foresee a similar industry if and when these schemes are decommissioned in 40 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. I still have quite a few councillors wanting to ask questions. That is Councillor Reid, Horrell, Pearson, Atwell, and myself. And don't forget, and now Edwards as well. Yeah, you hadn't put your hand up before. And don't forget that this is a slot for both supporters. So though the agent is naturally attracting a lot of the questions, you are free to ask Winchester Action on Climate Crisis representative as well. We move to Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to come back for a second bite of the cherry, but it's something I'd forgotten to ask. Already mentioned during the public presentation was the fact that this term is 40 years. I think it's probably the longest one we've done. Normally, I believe we're 25 years. Was there a reasoning for the 15 years extension, what one would call a fairly normal application?
So when there was a subsidy for solar, either the feed-in tariff or the renewable obligation certificate, those subsidies were based on 20 years of support. So when applications were submitted, they were based on 25 years of support to cover that period and some. So that this 25-year period has sort of emerged sort of quasi artificially. The 40-year period without the subsidy is based upon anticipated returns, the longevity of the panels, and the need for a longer term shift into renewables and diversifying the energy supply of the country. So 40 years is based on a commercial calculation and based on the longevity of the panels, rather than being based on what is now an expired subsidy position.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. A question for Winnack, in fact. Thank you. Understandably, you're supportive of a solar farm, given your raison d'etre as an organisation, and many of us obviously very keen on solar farms, but in the right location. You made mention in your speech about supporting the number of supporters for this application, but my understanding, looking at the detail, is the majority of those are from outside of the area. How do you square the democratic deficit there of your desire for the solar farm, but actually the majority of the support comes from people who will not be impacted by this development? Thank you, Chair.
Excuse me. Our feeling is that this planning authority, which has power to make a decision for solar farm applications, is elected by people from all parts of the district, and that those voters should have the right to express concerns that they may have that climate policies of the district are implemented. So we feel it's legitimate for the wider community to express their views. I don't know the exact division of where it lies, but that's that's our feeling.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are possibly to both of you, so it's been up to which one you want to answer. I recognise the arguments that Bill is making about the need for energy in the area, and of course the agent steps forward. Yes, we're prepared to do that. See, there are 2 other sites within 2 miles of this site, so we're filling the gap with solar panels. So the curiosity is, when the Historic England says it's less than substantial harm, and I hope shortly they will define exactly what that means, and this country imports or produces only 65% of its own food, and you're emphasising the use of a beautiful landscape rather than putting solar panels on houses, can you explain to me how we can make up for the loss of farmland, albeit 3B category, which is pasture land, which is what this farm was?
We'll provide you with a quick response and then Bill might add some comments. So for total clarity, there's no loss of farmland here because the land will continue to be grazed, or continue to be used in agricultural use. And that's what the planning practice guidance requires. It requires solar farms to be based on poorer quality land, such as grades 3B downwards, that's being 3B land. It requires land to remain in agricultural use through grazing, or to be used for biodiversity enhancements. And in this case, we're keeping it in agricultural use through grazing, and the landowner has made it clear they're very keen to graze the land, or to have someone graze the land, and been approached on that basis. And we're doing substantial biodiversity net gain enhancements. So we're ticking both those boxes when to comply with the policy. You only need to comply. You only need to tick one of those.
I can follow up on that, Chair. You say the farmer can still use the land. And I understand from a letter that farmers switching from dairy because there's no market for produce, dairy produce, or at least not at the value he can produce it, that we would prepare to pay for it. So using the land for beef and or sheep. Now, when we went on that site visit, we walked across field 4 towards the underneath the transmission lines, which is part of the national grid. That land was very, very wet, hardly suitable for sheep. And the other irony I saw there, this is within an ancient deer park, and you're fencing this area to keep deer out. Is there an irony in that? That you are proposing using the land for sheep, and it's unsuitable for sheep, beef cattle possibly, but you're keeping deer out, which is part of the natural landscape.
You know, all we can do is assess this against the planning policy and the planning guidance. I'm not a farmer, but as you've heard from the landowner direct, and as they've told me, they've been approached by grazers to graze sheep on that land, and I presume that includes the land you've highlighted. It has been very wet recently, stating the obvious. It's the middle of winter. As far as I'm aware, that land isn't unsuitable for grazing sheep. You know, there's no ultimate absolute obligation for the land to remain in agricultural use. We're facilitating that use on the land, and we're doing the biodiversity net gain enhancements. So we're going above and beyond what's required under the planning policy and the planning guidance. And your second question about the deer, you know, ultimately, we think it's in the best interests of wildlife to facilitate access for all animals other than deer. If deer get in amongst the panels, they can be injured. The deer park is an extensive area, and there's extensive other habitat which can be used by deer. We've undertaken ecology assessment which didn't know the presence of deer. I think the impact on deer in that area is, based on everything I've seen, seems minimal. And we've worked very hard to protect all aspects of the environment and, you know, ecology and habitats, and enhance the biodiversity value of the site and its surroundings as a result of the proposals.
Sorry, could I just very briefly come back to the question of land use from the perspective of the climate specialist organisation? Our response would be that the temporary loss of farmland pales into insignificance in relation to the permanent long-term damage that climate change is threatening to our landscape, both visually and in productive terms. That's why we, and indeed the Council, use the language of emergency in relation to climate change, and emergency in turn leads us into actions which difficult decisions that have to be taken, such as you now face.
Sure.
Councillor Atchwell?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just I'll change the topic slightly. I'm going looking at the traffic management plan. Could you just explain how you intend to get the panels onto the site? What route you're going to take?
Certainly, the traffic or the vehicles arriving at site will arrive from the west or southwest from the Botley direction, turning right into the site using the new carefully considered access design. That can accommodate standard articulated vehicles, which we prefer to use because it results in less vehicles on the road, lower emissions, less disturbance, rather than using a higher number of smaller vehicles. The vehicles will then offload at the proposed construction compound, and then smaller vehicles will take the panels and other construction materials and cabling, panels, whatever's required to build the solar farm, were then transported using smaller vehicles onto the actual construction site itself.
Sorry, Chair, can I just carry on from that? So you're saying from the Botley direction, I mean, that could be from anywhere. Can you explain a bit more, please?
Well, I don't know if they've got the route on the site there. So you would leave the M27 to the south and then head northwards. I believe is that the A305, and then in a generally northeast direction along Botley Road, turning right into the site of the site entrance.
I'll just come back again, Chair. So this is going through Coderidge?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So there's an extremely narrow bridge next to the horse and jockey there. And how heavy are these lorries going to be? I'm not sure that bridge can actually take the weight of.
We've checked the route, and from memory, I didn't note any statutory weight restrictions. If need be, we can alter the vehicle weights, and we would take those into consideration. There's no objection from Highways, who reviewed this in great detail over the course of 3-4 iterations of the traffic management plan. But certainly, if there are potential weight restrictions, we'll take those into account during the detailed construction preparation phase.
Thank you. The lady standing, do you want to go back to your seat? Or? Yes. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Just a quick point, I hope, of technical clarification. How physically will this farm be connected to the grid?
So the point of connection is to the 33 kV network, which is in field 5, I believe, to the existing wooden pole and overhead line configuration. And there'll be no new overhead poles, no new pylons. So it's the green dashed line, the most northerly green dashed line, roughly where the cursor is. Yes, precisely there. Thanks.
That is an underground cable?
That is an existing overhead cable, overground cable on wooden poles, and the cable from the solar farm will be connected to that, likely up an existing pole and spliced into the network.
I think I'm the last question. I've got two. I was rereading last night the representations from members of the public, and there was one fact which was listed as a fact which struck me. It's on page 39 of our report, and it says solar doesn't work at night and limited in the winter. Well, that's obvious, but over a year will only generate 11% of their installation capacity. Would you like to comment on that?
That's broadly right. Wind farms generate about 33% in windy areas. Solar farms, 11% is probably there or thereabouts. Some years it will generate more, some years it will generate less. It will generate more during the summer, less in the winter, and obviously won't generate any at night. But solar and large-scale ground mount solar are seen as a vital part of the country's new energy mix. And you know, a good way of decarbonising the grid. And I think solar is the appropriate technology in this part of the world with lower wind speeds and landscapes, low-lying, slight gently undulating landscapes which can accommodate solar farms.
May I add? Very
So,
brief.
Thank you. Yes, I'm
Sorry, again, just
could I just finish my question to the agent? So, as technology changes, will you be changing the panels?
You know, a decision will be made at the time of commencing construction and procuring the, you know, the panels and the other various pieces of equipment of which panels to use. It may well be at some point in the future, if there's a, you know, a change in technology and it's you know, sensible to change those panels, that may happen. But you know, a decision needs to be made at, you know, the current time based on current policy, current guidance on the current availability of technology. It's not, you know, practical to chop and change throughout the duration of the project, just as any other development. You build it, and that's you know, what you use. But like I say, you know, at some point in the future, it may be that, you know, the output of panels increases. We are limited to the grid capacity, and there have been some queries about that. You know, the relationship between AC and DC of the grid application and the battery element, which could be removed. I'm more than happy to expand on that. I mean, ultimately, the grid offer we received 3.5 years ago when we applied for it didn't include the battery element. So we included the battery into the planning application to potentially future-proof, you know, the incorporation of battery into the scheme. But the reason we didn't reduce the scale of the proposals after removing the battery element from the planning application is because the battery element was never covered by the grid application and the grid offer in the first place. So the removal of the battery doesn't have any bearing in planning terms, doesn't have any bearing on the output of the scheme.
Mr. Gunyon, you wanted to come in there?
Sorry, just very briefly again, adding the sort of climate change angle on your question. Last week, the government's independent advisor, the UK Climate Change Committee, published a detailed report presenting a vision of how a decarbonised grid will work in 2035. And the purpose of the report is to provide reassurance on how these characteristics of solar and wind can be addressed in conditions of extreme adversity, like there is no sun and no wind. The whole purpose of the report is to reassure the type of objection or query that you raised.
Thank you very much. And my last question, second question. You've removed the battery storage facility. Would you like to expand on that? And do you have intentions of returning that into the site?
Well, the battery element has been removed from the planning application. The planning application needs to be determined on that merit. I'm not saying we won't apply in the future, but as I've explained, the grid offer we hold from SSE doesn't include any import from the grid or the ability to incorporate a battery into the scheme as it stands just now. We won't be applying to alter that grid offer. So as things stand just now, and as far as our plans are for the future, we won't be applying, or we won't be incorporating a battery anytime soon.
Thank you. I think that's it for questions. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for... Yes, Councillor Pearson. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, how are you going to cater for power surges from this, to and from this site? Are you anticipating in future storage batteries?
Well, like I say, the output of the solar farm is geared exactly to the capacity that SSE have allocated us. We will be bound by the grid agreement with SSE not to exceed that. And, you know, the scheme will be designed to ensure that when it's operating at its maximum capacity, it's within that bound that SSE have, you know, given us. And I'm not a grid engineer. It's highly complex, but, you know, my understanding is that there are, you know, punitive, you know, repercussions if you exceed that, damage the local network. You know, there's, you know, fines, or, you know, we will be ensuring 100% that we don't exceed what we've been told we can export to the grid.
How would you anticipate dealing with power surges? Yeah. Floor's yours.
Sorry, I'm not qualified to answer the question.
Well, we've said that the sunshine some days, not others, certainly not at night. The whole system.
Yeah, I'm happy to clarify that.
You get, you know, power production and not power production. So presumably this implies some form of storage batteries.
So if the grid offer is here, this is the grid level we can export to. The maximum anticipated output during, you know, a sunny day in the middle of summer is the same. If that's the maximum that the plant can produce, the solar farm can produce. It can't surge beyond that for some reason, and there are limiting devices incorporated into the scheme that need be. But, you know, the capacity of the scheme presented for planning permission is carefully designed and geared into the agreement we have with SSE to ensure that we don't exceed the power that we've been told we can produce and send into the grid. I think it's straying into non-material issues.
I think the answer is switch my television off now because you ain't getting any power.
At night we won't produce any power, so yeah, we're not going to blow your TV up.
Okay. So I think we have finally reached the end of the questions for these gentlemen. So thank you very much indeed for coming along. Now, members, we never, as you know, normally break in the middle of an application, but we are only really at the beginning. We've got questions on various sections and we've got debate to go. So would you like a break now or later on? Yes to a break now. So Dan, did you want to take us through that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, obviously we're mid-session, so do take heed as to who you talk to, if anyone at all. Probably take your convenience, come back, refresh yourself, but please urge caution talking to any members of the public whilst you're in mid-session. Thank you.
So I think the Vice Chair was requesting 15 minutes. So we will start again at nearly past, but members of the public, could you not go out so that there's no contact between members of the committee who have yet to make their decision? So nearly past. Can we reassemble, please? You should have one of these forms on your seat, but if you don't have one, they are available outside. And it's just really a survey of how we deal with your applications. So please fill them in. We're very interested in your views, good or bad. And there's a little box, see-through box that you put the whatever you've written and whatever you want to say to us in. Right, so we are now moving through the report, and members intend to take several sections at a time. To members of the public and people listening, we had a site visit yesterday. We were all there. And we walked across the site and had a very thorough understanding of what the site entails. So it was a very useful visit. So we've just finished public speaking, but Stephen and Robert, did you have any updates from what you heard? Okay, so we're moving on to the report. The principle of development starts on page 43, but there's nothing to read. So I was going to go through the NSPPF heading, and the impact on the area, which takes us to page 51. So members, any questions on those areas from 43 to 51? Councillor Reid.
No, it is a question, but it's based on a clarification really. If equipment is modified to the degree that it's upgraded and has to be replaced, would that constitute a new application?
I don't think so, but anyway, I'm looking at the officers.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chairman, it's not really relevant to your consideration on the matter before you today. What happens in the future should really have no bearing upon whether or not the panel's longevity or whether or not they fail. Ultimately, you're presented with the application. You've seen, obviously, the scheme before you. You've walked the site and you've got 53,000, 56,000 from memory. To all intents and purposes, for example, if you were to draw an analogy, if you're maintaining your home, a car crashes into your fence, the fence falls down, you're allowed to replace that fence. So maintenance ordinarily doesn't trigger the need for a planning application. If it's general maintenance, there is then a degree and a continuum as to whether or not that's maintenance, replacement, and so on. But ultimately, it shouldn't be in your consideration today and come to your conclusion.
It was a question that came up within the public session, as you were aware.
Thank you. Any further questions? Oh yes, Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. Would the officers be able to help me to understand the different designations? We've received correspondence from CPRE describing the land as valued landscape, which isn't confirmed in the officer's report. Could someone help me to understand why there's such a difference between learned parties? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Happy to answer that. So there are a number of criteria which assist the authority in assessing whether a landscape is valued landscape, and obviously that's referring to the comment that we've had from CPRE. The update sheet does refer to that, so it acknowledges that we've received that response, and it also assesses and confirms that in this instance, officers do not believe that the site constitutes valued landscape, but it does go into detail on the survey that CPRE have undertaken, which does signify some areas. So this is just a confirmation that there are criteria set up which assist the authority in assessing this aspect. We've considered that in our assessment, which has led to that conclusion, and the agent has also provided further justification, which we concur with. So the update sheet does confirm to members following that CPRE comment that this is not considered to be valued landscape. And we've assessed it under the relevant MPPF paragraphs and our own policy as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I meant to say that we have had several late representations, including a second one from CPRE. And as Rob said, these have all been assessed, and the information is either in the main report or on the update sheet. Councillor Westwood? No? Oh, Councillor Edwards, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a follow-up to that question. The Council for the Protection of Rural England has the word council, and that can mean all sorts of different things. We are, of course, one ourselves, but there are also non-departmental bodies, which are councils and also charities. So just for the point of clarification, could I know, if I need to be the only one, a little bit more about the status of CPRE and whether it has regulatory or statutory responsibilities?
Thank you. So yes, through you, Madam Chairman. So the CPRE is the campaign council, not council. So you have to realise it comes from a particular perspective, from a particular position. Ultimately, it is within your gift to look at those considerations. It's a matter as to what weight you place upon those considerations, much like any other objection, be it statutory or indeed residential. So it really is a matter for you as to whether or not you're minded to put weight on the CPRE, indeed the planning officer's reports in evaluating those assessments, as well as the update sheet. And you've heard from Mr. Green already about paragraph 174. This concept of valued landscape has been considered. The update sheet does indeed refer to the MPPF paragraph 174. So ultimately, it is something that you put into your planning balance, if it were. You put it into the cauldron as with everything else in the mix, and ultimately it's where you place the weights as you see fit. That's as far as I could probably go in regards to the CPRE and their submissions that you've got before you today.
I've got Councillor Reid, unless it's related to.
Well, I was going to say, as I'm on the CPRE policy panel, I could define it a little bit more. It is a charity, Councillor Edwards, very influential charity, as WINAC is. It's, as such, a national charity which is divided into regional areas, and each regional area looks at specific topics. In the CPRE, its raison d'etre is to protect the countryside, basically, from urban sprawl.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Under the impact, character and appearance, with the effects on the public rights of way, we've spoken about the footpath 13, which is going to go through the centre of the site. Is it intended that that would have any gates or stiles, or would it be an open footpath leading into the Wildflower Meadow, I think it was going to be?
Chair, I could take that question. There'd be no additional obstructions or any kind of that nature than there is at the moment.
Right, there being no more, Councillor Ashwell.
Sorry, I'm just coming across this. On page 50, traffic levels should not result in harm to the rural character. So it's been mentioned that construction traffic will be going along the Curridge area. I just wondered if there's any way we can restrict that movement on that road, because of the nature of the road itself. Very narrow. There's actually been a fatality on that road recently. So I don't know if those details have been looked into or not.
Chair, I think, as we heard earlier, the construction traffic route is part of the traffic management plan that's been submitted and reviewed by the highway engineer, who's not raised any concerns regarding the proposal.
That's not true, yeah. So we're obviously finished up to 43 to 51. So we'll move on to 51 to 61, which is South Downs. And then a very large section, important section on the historic environment. So pages 51 to 61. Any questions? If not, then we'll, oh, Councillor Horan.
Chair, thank you. I'm hoping that this is the right place to ask this question.
Ask it
And if not, please advise. It seems to me from the maps we've seen this morning, the sort of paraphernalia, shall I call it, of the electrical connections and the like, excuse the non-technical terms, is as we saw yesterday, in front of the listed building in closest proximity. Given that we've got a 5-field site, had the officers had any discussions about all of that being moved to one of the other fields, because there are clearly many electrical connection points in that area, to alleviate some of the concerns about the views from the listed building? Thank you.
I was just checking with the head of built environment that would need another planning application if that were to be proposed. Does that answer your question?
Chair, my question really was to the officers. Had they, given that they realised that there was obviously concern from the residents, and with such a large site, it is possible to reorientate clearly. Had there been any discussions with the applicant about reorientating some of those elements to other parts, other fields within this application?
Chair, members, excuse me, members will see in the that section, we adopted a staged approach to assessing the setting issue. And on page 59, it goes into, as it were, step forward, which is exploring ways to maximise enhancement and avoid or minimise harm. And that sets out the discussion that we had with the applicant and the reasons put forward why Field 5 was chosen for the location of the supporting infrastructure. And it sets down there through a series of bullet points the reasons why they chose that field as opposed to any of the others. And it was the officer's conclusion that there were sufficient technical, operation and broader environmental reasons why Field 5 was considered appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hart. So we are still on the South Downs. I know there was concern about the South Downs being fairly near the moors, and Bishopsautham being fairly near the solar park. South Downs assessment is to have left it quite clearly up to the local planning authority to take a view on that. And then we have all the issues about historic environment as well. Any questions on those? No? So we will then move on to the next section, which starts on page 61, the neighbouring amenity, which has also been a matter of concern, and the impact from the resulting glint and glare consultants, and sustainable transport, which is so that takes us up to page 66. So page 61 to 66. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I know we're assessing this application in isolation, but clearly we've seen information on site ourselves, and indeed maps that we've been presented with that shows other solar farm developments in the locality, and indeed one pending. So you have a huge array of solar panels proposed over and above the 5 that we can see, 5 fields we can see on the screen. Can the officers help us to understand what that overall cumulative effect of these additional 5 fields to all those that already have permissions either completed or pending, please, on the overall environment? Thank you.
Chair, sorry, cumulative impact was a factor that we have taken into account during the consideration of this application, and we're content that as a result of the adjoining solar farm to the east and this proposal, there wouldn't be any adverse impact arising from that matter.
Chair, can you help me to understand how is that assessed then? What's the technical data point that we have for that, please? Thank you.
I should imagine it's visibility to start with.
Chair, I draw members' attention to page 50, where we've set out the DM23 rural character. We've identified those 5 criteria. Number 1 includes reference to cumulative impacts considered. So we've obviously taken that into account in preparing the report.
If I could, thank you. I think the question also relates more to the construction impacts as well on transport. So just to provide that comfort that, as Stephen's mentioned, the Highway Authority have reviewed all of the routing plans for this application. Yes, it is a point in time, but if any other developments do come forward, again, at that point in time, the Highway Authority is the common thread through that. So they will be consulted, whether that's, in our district or not, Hampshire Highways Authority, other common thread. So the cumulative impact is assessed both on the landscape and also the construction impacts as well at that point in time.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't remember whether we've moved on to neighbouring amenities, but we're going to do so now. And the historic environment, is that part of that one? No, that we've done that one. So neighbouring amenities, I've got 61 to 66 down in my notes. So yeah. So that's neighbouring amenities, which is 3 pages. Impact, oh yes, for the glint and glare. And sustainable transport. Any further questions on that? Councillor Ashford.
Sorry, I'm going to go back on about the roads, and I'm disappointed we haven't got anyone from Hampshire County Council here. So the speed on this Botley Road is 60 miles an hour. Mine is more a question on safety of having lorries going down that road at 60 miles an hour and how sustainable that is.
Sure, obviously any vehicle associated with this site would have to comply with whatever regulations apply to the existing road network in terms of speeds, or be they weight limitations or width restrictions. And obviously, if for example an HGV is allowed to along a road presently, then there's no reason why that traffic associated with this development couldn't equally be allowed to use that road.
Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Chairman, it's just a slight follow on from that. Obviously, looking at the amount of equipment that's got to be transported to the site, and that would include obviously some concrete because there are foundations to be laid for various cabins, etc. Is that road suitable for an articulated vehicle? Because I can't see them sending them in 2 smaller vehicles. I would have thought 50 or 60,000 units will come in a fairly large articulated.
There'd been no objections from Hampshire Highways, I believe,
No, I haven't, Chair. No, I'm,
and so they are aware of the type of vehicle that will
Yes.
be used. Yeah.
and the numbers, the numbers obviously would vary. What we presented in the report was an average, and I think the numbers vary between 23 and 30 per day. But I can't go into any more detail beyond what I explained earlier about if they're allowed on those, because the A and B roads that the construction traffic movements would be confined to, if they're allowed on to use those roads today, how can we restrict them from continuing to do so?
And Hampshire Highways is the statutory consultee over matters of uses of the road. Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, this is something which actually links with ecology and biodiversity as well. The field certainly that we walked across was very, very wet, and I wonder about the movement of machinery across those fields when the solar panels are being put in place with the structures necessary. You refer to the bridge being capable of taking 44-ton lorries. Oh, that doesn't mean you're going to have 44-ton lorries actually going onto the site, because they will make substantial environmental damage. But moving from the initial transport lorries to the individual sites. Now, how is that going to be managed? Is this land going to be drained prior to, which is obviously going to impact on the Hamble River and downstream, and or once it has been put in place, are we, even though there is a wildlife meadow planned, field rule, well, it's not a field number, it's between 3 and 4, I think. Is the whole of the site going to be seeded with wildlife flowers which could exist underneath the panels? So there's two questions there. How are they going to manage the drainage of that site while they're putting the panels in place? And the second one, are they going to repair the damage to the soil by reseeding it with wildlife flowers, for example?
Thank you. In terms of the approach to the work on the main 5 fields, I think it's highly likely that the applicant would install the roadways in the first instance to gain access and use those for carrying the vehicles. As we heard from the agent, the deliveries to the site would be broken down in the compound and moved onto smaller vehicles to be moved down the new access roadway across the bridge onto the site. The fact that the bridge has a 45-ton capacity obviously doesn't imply that that's what it would, the type of vehicle they envisage carrying over it. The heaviest vehicle that there was ever a discussion about crossing that bridge would be an emergency vehicle, and this was at a time when the battery storage compound was still, as it were, part of the scheme, and the weight of the fire and rescue vehicle, I believe, was 29 tons, maybe mentioned. But clearly that's unlikely to occur at the moment because the battery storage element is no longer part of the scheme. There is a proposal for a drainage scheme within the site, surface water management scheme. The site would be seeded, all the ground would be seeded under the panels, but obviously the wildflower meadow would be specifically seeded with that species-rich seed to generate the wildflower meadow area.
You have 44-ton lorries, but that's a tractor trailer unit you're talking about, 44-ton lorry. it's a big vehicle. So that's not just the bridge, that's the access tracks as well. So they've got to take that weight load, potential take that weight load. Now, is this all being factored into the design of these access tracks, as well as the impact on the fields when they're putting the site in place? You're not, maybe I'm asking the wrong person that question. I mean, maybe the agent would better answer it. I don't know. It's up to you, Chair, but if Stephen does know the answer, I mean, I guess it would be pity he doesn't. But I don't know the answer myself. I don't know how it's had to be tackled.
Councillor Pearson, sorry, Stephen, I am looking at the section on water management, where a lot of these issues that you're bringing up have been addressed. Is that not so, case officers?
Yeah, I was simply going to draw attention. I don't believe, although the bridge has a 46-ton capacity, obviously, I don't believe that the roads would be designed to the equivalent of that. Because as I indicated, I think it's very unlikely they would be moving a vehicle of that weight about. Under condition 8, on page 83, we do require the agreement of the details regarding the roadways. That condition breaks the roadway down into different sections. So obviously we would ensure that whatever vehicle does need to get onto the site, and I'm thinking particularly of an emergency vehicle, then the roadway system will be capable of accommodating it.
Are you saying, through you, Chairman, that the site will be managed by ourselves when there always would building regulations manage this? Otherwise, you're going to substantial runoff of clay soil into the Hamble River and all the downstream problems that would cause. I mean, I'm not trying to come up with reasons why it shouldn't be built. What I'm trying to do is get clarification of how it is going to be built.
Chair, condition 7, which is the construction environmental management plan, as you can see, is very extensive, covers a whole range of factors. And item J on page 82, measures to prevent pollution of any watercourse during construction. So we believe we've covered all the issues that we need to.
So clearly it's going to have to be managed by somebody as they're doing it.
Well,
you know, to make sure those conditions are carried out.
Yeah.
We don't normally do that.
Condition. Stephen, do you want to say anything else, or Julie?
Yeah, after you. Sorry, Chair, I've got your mic, I think. Only after where Stephen pointed out condition 7J, if you go on after that, it talks about H, it talks about details of the use of an ecological clerk of works as well, and it will be for the developer and applicant to ensure they comply with the conditions, A, that we've set out, and B, with the detail they submit to us and approve.
Rob's rules and the details.
Yeah, okay. So we've already moved into the next section, which was, oh, sorry, Councillor Rotter.
No, Chair, if you're already in ecology, that's where my questions are, if that's okay. Thank you. Brilliant. Could I just ask about the meadow? I've glanced through the conditions. No, I've read the conditions carefully, but I can't remember if the maintenance, the proper maintenance of the meadow is conditioned. Because as we all know, wildflower meadows don't just look after themselves, but they do require careful management. And is that conditioned? And my second question is about skylarks. When we were on the site visits yesterday, there was clear evidence of skylarks on site. They are ground nesting threatened birds. Will they still be able to nest on the fields in amongst the panels? And my final question is, will the fields actually be used for grazing? There was some consideration yesterday as we were walking across that finding sheep under panels is notoriously difficult, and that therefore it wouldn't be used for grazing of sheep. And is there any other consideration of how the land will be used if it's not used for grazing sheep? Thank you.
Chair, I'll take the first and third question. My colleague will deal with the Skylark question. In terms of securing the wildflower meadow, the landscape ecology management plan will secure that. And as I indicated during the presentation, we've got an agreement for a 3-year rolling monitoring review throughout the entire life of this site, of the whole 40 years. That review will be looking, what I anticipate, that review will be looking back over what's been undertaken and accomplished, and then looking forward to guide any subsequent works to correct or to replace vegetation that may not have come forward as anticipated, or may have died, or whatever circumstance. So we believe we've got that very tightly secured. The third part of your question,
Grazing,
which was grazing, it's my understanding that the applicants are proposing to use sheep, and it's referred to in the report, on the basis from other experience, if developers of solar farms anticipate using sheep grazing from the beginning, then they can install the facilities to make accommodation for that. And I'm thinking in terms of the wiring being sufficiently protected to avoid it being damaged by the sheep.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll cover the question on the Skylarks. We discussed it on site yesterday, and I followed up with the ecology officer as well. Apparently, it's quite a hot topic in the ecology officer world. So they confirmed, as we said, they are open nesting species, but they generally require open vistas to see predators coming. So whilst there is potential for them to use the outer areas and places like the wildflower, then they are unlikely to nest under the solar panels because they do like the open spaces. But they did say there's a lack of research on it and a bit of debate at the moment.
Councillor Reid, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman.
Are you asking a question on the next section, or are you still on the 61 to 66? So we all know where we are.
Starts on 66, ecology. It's a
All right,
question
so yeah,
based on.
so we're moving
ecology.
then, good. We're moving then on to the next section, which is 66 to 72, which is ecology and biodiversity, water management, which we've sort of discussed, fire safety. So Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. My question is based on page 70, the penultimate paragraph, which says that discussions have taken place with the applicant and an agreement has been reached with regarding the funding of, and this is the word that worries me, reasonable cost to the council monitoring the site. Can you define reasonable, please?
Chair, the discussions that are in fact still ongoing with the applicant, because obviously we haven't completed any agreements as yet, is what we're anticipating is that the reviews of the management of the site in subsequent years should be taking probably around about 2 days' time to look at, in terms of reviewing a document and then making some submission forward on that. We have come up with a figure to sort of cap the payments on those discussions. I don't know if we're in a position to disclose that or not. I've advised not, but we are conscious of the need for us to recover reasonable costs for the work of an authority officer or officers involved in this assessment.
I would assume then that this will be locked up into a legal agreement. This 40 years is still a long time.
That's part of the recommendation, Chairman, to go in the legal agreement, is this recovery of costs, yes.
Thank you. Any further questions on those sections? So I think this then brings us to the end of the report. So we'll discuss the conditions separately if we need to, but this is page 72 onwards. Oh, no, sorry, 73. So it's the effect on and potential loss of agricultural land, and then protecting the sewer pipe and any other matters not considered. Any questions on those sections? Councillor Pearson.
Well, I raised this issue in my questions, Chairman, so I better, develop this. It's, from a national point of view, it's a relatively small piece of land, but even though it is 3B land, I'd like to comment on this. 3B land, which is pasture, my knowledge of farming suggests that sheep, which is mentioned as a possibility of use of this land, don't do well on wet pasture land. They get foot rot, basically, is basically what happens. So, and that's my question about the drainage of this site. But the irony is, sheep graze the same way as deer.
Question,
there's a question here.
Okay.
Questions without some explanation make a nonsense.
Yeah.
Like less than substantial harm. I mean,
go ahead with your question.
Okay. Deer graze the same way as sheep, and that the irony is this is a deer park which is going to have a different land use, and yet you're keeping deer out. And there's a suggestion in the report here you're going to use that the farmer might use it for sheep. Now, can you rationalise that? It doesn't seem to make sense.
Chair, I don't come from a farming background, so I need to caveat this answer, but I would imagine that, as with any farmer with livestock, they would put the cattle out on the land at certain times of the year and not put them in at other times. And I was in a conversation with the farmer before the site visit yesterday, and we were discussing the condition of the land and how good the grass was, but that it was too wet for him to put his existing cattle out. And I would imagine that any sheep would be managed in a similar way.
If he's going to put sheep on that land, why are you keeping deer out?
I think they said yesterday there was deer fencing, didn't they?
Well, I think the agent made reference to the keeping deer out because there was a concern that they might injure themselves on the panels. Obviously, deer and sheep have different characteristics in terms of how they act. But I mean, obviously, one of the other factors is to secure the site to avoid any people getting into the site as well. Well,
the footpath is.
Which is why there are two fenced off areas and the footpath goes in the middle between the two fenced off areas.
Okay, Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. May I ask a question under other matters not considered above? And it relates to the very extensive CCTV installation on the fencing and the angling of that. And it's very clear in the report that it has to be agreed at the beginning, but of course over time, if it's 40 years, how are we going to ensure that those cameras do not become intrusive either to the neighbouring properties or indeed to those walking the paths? Where is our assurance, shall I say, that this is not going to become such a monitored area when today you walk very freely and happily there, but we're going to be on camera potentially in the new regime? Thank you.
Condition 23, proposed condition 23, requires that we agree the details in terms of the field of view that the cameras would capture to ensure that they do focus down the fence line. And the final part of that condition requires that the cameras are then installed in accordance with the approved specification and no change to the field of view shall take place hereafter. So we believe that secures that issue to a satisfactory extent.
Looking at that condition, I think that answers your question.
I don't think it does, Chair, because I understand at the beginning that that will be agreed, which is very clear. My question is what happens, 2, 3, 5, 10 years on in terms of ensuring that that is maintained. Thank you.
Are they checked, in other words?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as you said, condition 23 secures that plan, and it secures it at that point in time for the record that this is how the planning authority expects the positioning of the cameras to be laid out. It does relate to ongoing enforcement of that. So if it is reported to us, that we have that plan to refer back to. If a camera is pointing in the wrong direction, then we have those. We can use enforcement at that time if it does occur.
Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a question that actually was raised yesterday at the site meeting. I think Councillor Evans raised it. And that was when you look at the lay of the land, from the pylon going north, the land drops down towards the river. And I think the question of the day was, these are all going to be set at a certain height and a certain angle. But how do the ones that drop down into the valley of the river still achieve their potential? Or will they be raised higher?
Chair, excuse me, I sought clarification from the agent about that question after yesterday's site visit. I'm advised that as the land drops away at that northern edge of the field, the angle of the panels would be adjusted. It is possible that the angle becomes so acute that they may then decide not to install the last row or two of panels. But I was assured that whatever arrangement they placed on site, they wouldn't exceed the height limit, which is 3 meters.
Okay. I think we're moving into the last section. Yes. And that's questions on the conditions. Councillor Roger.
Thank you, Chair. On our update sheet on page 5, we have an additional informative about noisy infrastructure. And I'm just asking why that's an informative and whether we could make that a condition, please. Is that possible? And that's the one that you changed the wording to, because there was the opposite was written down, but it's furthest away.
A request from Councillor Rotter. Can the 15 informative additional one be made a condition?
The condition 26 on noise secures what the Environmental Protection Officer considers is the amenity of nearby residential properties to a satisfactory degree. The informative was placed there because we considered it was good practice, shall we say, that when the applicant did come to place the equipment on site, if there was, for example, an extraction fan, which was a potential source of noise, it would be sensible to direct that fan back into the field rather than it pointing out on the side of a building towards any of the residential properties. And that's why it was there as an informative rather than imposed through the specific condition.
Is it not possible to condition that though? I mean, so that the option isn't there, but they always have to make sure that anything that is noise emitting is directed away from the residential properties.
Chairman, I think we talked about this as officers, and when we impose a condition, it has to meet the national tests. So, in order to do that, it has to meet those 6 tests that I've explained to you before. And we just didn't believe, in terms of what our Environmental Protection Officer has said is required, this condition 26 meets the test. To go beyond that is to go beyond our powers in our view, but we didn't think it was unreasonable to add an informative. I mean, what I was wondering is, in condition 26, if we just put a bracket there to say, and please note informative 15, so as you know, someone that might not read right through to the end doesn't pick up that informative 15. So I mean, that's something I think would be good practice on our part, but I think to go beyond that would be to go beyond the test set out in terms of imposing conditions, Chair.
If we could do that, please, thank you.
Any more questions on the conditions? Councillor Laming, then Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst this is a design life of 40 years and they're going to return it at the end of that time to agricultural land, my question, or what I would like some assurance is, how can we enforce that in 40 years' time if the company is no longer in existence? Should we not consider a bail bond of some sort on this application to cover those costs? Although I don't think I'll be here in 40 years.
Chair, any enforcement would originally be against the operating company. In the event that that company was in some sort of difficulty, we would then obviously be looking at the landowner to remedy it. I think when the agent spoke, he made reference to the value of any materials on site that would justify someone decommissioning the site. We did consider whether it would be appropriate to impose a bond to be held for decommissioning. And I had looked around to see of other examples where this might have taken place. And I found an example over in Essex relating to Uttlesford District Council, who do seem to have used a bond on at least one appeal decision that I'm aware of. However, I then discovered that this council were placed under special measures, which means that the Secretary of State had the option, or rather an applicant has the option of then applying to either the council or making his application to the Secretary of State to get a decision in appropriate time. And there was an appeal that had gone through the special measures process that had been submitted and was dealt with by the Secretary of State. And in that appeal decision, the inspector acting for the Secretary of State says there's no national guidance on which you're relying to impose this bond. You've got no local plan policy on which you're applying to seek such a bond. Therefore, that inspector didn't grant that decision with a decommissioning bond. And I'm afraid, Chairman, we're in the same position. There is no national guidance. We have no local policy to that effect.
Chair, but can I say we do have condition 4 on the paper that requires those details for cessation and decommissioning before the 40th anniversary. So in our mind, that condition meets those tests I talked about just in respect to the other point.
Yeah, I was just by chance looking at that too. 40 years is the maximum period, but we've covered the condition of 4 if it should cease before 40 years. Councillor Rutter, you've spoken, haven't you? Yeah. Councillor Laming?
That's fine, thank you.
Yeah. And Councillor Horrell?
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions. One relates to the working hours condition 18. I'm slightly surprised to see it goes through to 6 o'clock on a Saturday. One would normally expect Saturday afternoon to be a quiet period, given the proximity of those fields to many houses. I'm just asking why it's a full 6-day week, 8 till 6. And also, Chair, just a point of clarification on condition 15. It refers to the Traffic Management Plan C dated the 30th of November. Can we just clarify, please, because there's obviously confirmation in the previous condition 09 about access to the site and the traffic management plan, and obviously the splay, etc. But we don't talk here, unless it is in Plan C, about the timings of that. It's a very not a easily accessible road, and whether there are restrictions on when vehicles can come in and out, because many of us who live in rural communities know what the delivery schedule for various sites can do to the dynamics. See Councillor Ashwell nodding to the dynamics of the road network in our rural communities. So clarification, please, on 15. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll address the working hours condition first. These were discussed with the applicant, and those are the times that they sought from us. The point was made, obviously, that the longer they have the ability to work on site, the quicker the overall project would be completed. We have subsequently made a further addition to that condition, which is in the update, which within the Saturday afternoon hours would state that no activity that's audible at the site boundaries should be undertaken after 1300 hours, which is the normal time that I think Councillor Hall was referring to. People normally stop work on a Saturday. So we believe that with that addition, everyone's interests are protected, and particularly the amenities of the nearby residential property. In terms of the traffic management plan, that document covers a significant number of individual issues, which we're not proposing to condition them separately. What we're doing is conditioning the totality of those matters within that plan, and one of them does cover the limitation on traffic movements to peak hours during the weekdays. I think that's the question that was raised.
Thank you.
I think we've come to the end of questions, and so debate. Councillor Rotter.
Thank you, Chair. I think when you declare a climate emergency, it needs to mean something. And whilst clearly there is a huge opportunity cost to developing a solar farm on this site, we do need to have improved energy security. We do need to decarbonise our energy supply. This report shows that this proposal has had very careful scrutiny, and in fact has changed over time after consultation with the local community and with our officers. It comes within our current planning policy. It will increase biodiversity. It will be well screened. For those who live in the near vicinity, obviously, it's going to have a huge impact. But I don't think that that impact is such that we should turn down this proposal. I'm concerned about the impact on residents, but as I say, I think that it will be well screened. It is a good distance away from the actual farmhouse. The 16th century farmhouse, I believe. But it's not a permanent facility. In 40 years, it will be gone. The land will have regenerated. It will have rested for 40 years. So it's not being sacrificed. It's a temporary facility, although it'll see me out, I know, but 40 years in the life of a 16th century farmhouse isn't that long. And hopefully in that time we'll have found another way of generating electricity which isn't damaging to the environment. So whilst I'm very aware of and sympathetic to the views of the near residents, I do believe that it will, in time, you'll get used to the solar panels. They'll certainly be quiet. I don't believe that you'll be impacted by the actual farm itself, solar farm. And as I say, you know, we need much better security for our energy supply, and this is one of the ways in which we'll be doing that. So I'm satisfied and will be supporting the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Rutter. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm caught between the devil and the deep blue sea on this one. I'm very aware that you'd have to be very, very divisive to choose any planning policy that we have on the books that would negate permission to grant for this. I'm delighted that the conditions are some of the most comprehensive that I've ever seen in 22 years on the council. Thank you, whoever generated those. Indeed, the whole report, it was almost a library. That's not counting what's on the website, not included here. So it's very, very comprehensive information. But I still have concerns. First, the impact of the environment, which is clear from what I've said in my questions. During the construction of this is very heavy land, clay land there. Ironically, on the other side of the valley, it seems to be more chalk, or at least chalk seems to be much closer to the surface, according to the tracks. Although that can be damaged again by vehicle movement. But it's conditions when you're looking at that, and I hope the monitoring of what happens on this site actually makes sure that the people who are building this don't actually do any accidental, if you like, damage to the site. The impacts on the views, the national park can be seen from this site in Upper Swanmore. You'd have to have a pair of binoculars, and it would probably look at a distance rather like a pond or a lake, rather like the solar farm down below Portsdown Hill and on the Southwark estate. Again, a very, very large solar farm. It can also be seen from Waltham Chase. Waltham Chase is very much closer to this, hence the concern that Shedfield Parish Council have. There's some concern that glare might be reflected in their eyes, but from the existing solar farms I've seen, that is something that the technologists have very much aware of, trying to reduce glare if possible. Glare is an issue. Historic impacts, it's a historic deer park, and I find it incredibly ironic that one of the things they have to do is to fence it to make sure deer actually go onto the land. It's the first time actually deer have been stopped roaming across this site since the enclosures in the 16th and 17th century. So there's a degree of irony there. The farmhouse, of course, dates from the same sort of period when the land was enclosed, when it was not after Oliver Cromwell's troop of cavalry did a demolition job on the palace, which is not too far from here. But the palace can't be seen from this site, and that, I think, is difficult. Can it be seen from the 16th, 17th century farmhouse? Well, at this time of the year, it probably can be, but we have assurance in the conditions that the boundaries, the trees will be protected. Indeed, that boundary between the site and the farmhouse will be enhanced, as indeed I hope the hedge off the Botley Road, where the new road comes in, that hedge is also reinstated, because that again is a hedgerow that dates back to enclosure period. It's a historic hedge, in other words. I'm very aware of the need for energy generation that Winnack and others, and Councillor Malcolm raised that issue. It's an important issue. We're all having to charge our electric cars. Well, I don't have an electric car, but there's a need, and we need that additional power. If we're switching off earthing, we're also actually exporting power, a lot of what is renewable energy, to France during when we have too much energy produced. It goes to France, and then equally, when France produces more than we do, it comes back to us. The CCTV cameras mentioned worried me. I understood when it's first mentioned they're actually around the boundary of the site rather than concentrated in the area by the farmhouse. Why? Do we expect vandals to come from the farmhouse and wreck the site or something? I know it's focused, and that's mentioned in the conditions, But it does worry me. I have a sort of a knee-jerk reaction to this. I hope it is a security say for both people concerned, but it does worry me. 40 years, the site has been mentioned a couple of times. Well, we don't know what's going to be needed in 40 years' time. Clearly, we're going to need more electricity, unless we're going to say, oh, we're going to have an alternative production of somewhere. Cars are made of hydrogen. You need electricity to generate the hydrogen, and so it goes on. We're always going to need renewable energy, and a solar farm is as good as any. We can't use wind turbines. The average wind speed is not strong enough in this area. The National Park is closer. I mentioned this viewpoint. It's actually just the other side. What does make me curious, and I'll finish with this point, is what is magical about this site around Bishop's Waltham is so attractive to solar farms. You know, it's no wonder people in Bishop Waltham say, hang on, what's going on? We value our countryside for health and well-being purposes. It's beautiful countryside. There are footpaths in this area. So what on earth is bringing these solar farms to this? And all the, well, I wouldn't say impacts, because from a distance they just look like ponds. But I don't know of any planning reason we've got that says we've got to turn this one down. I have reservations, as I clearly have said, but the conditions, and the congratulations to you two, I guess the pair of you wrote the report, recognise what CPRE has said, and I think we've covered their concerns, and equally what WINEC is saying. They have had two very good verbal representations there. It's a balance between those two opposing principles. And I think on balance, in this case, we have to go, we need this electricity. This is as good a site in the area, although why this area? Well, I'll be a NIMBY. I don't like it in the area. I want it moved somewhere else. But the reality, it is a sloping site. It faces the sun. That's perfect for this generation. So thanks again, you guys, for that report. And thanks for the public input, which helps to concentrate the mind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. And thank you to the officers for a very thorough briefing yesterday on site, and the material that they've given to us to make our considerations today. I think inherently solar farms we're all in favour of, given the climate emergency. And indeed, in my own ward, we recently agreed a solar farm with virtually unanimous support, no objections. And why was that? Because it was in a highly appropriate site and everyone could embrace the good that it was going to deliver. In the report, it talks about the fact that energy or low carbon energy does not automatically override environmental protection. And there's been much debate in the report, and the report acknowledges that it is a balancing act that you've undertaken. And on some areas today, it seems to me that that's a matter of opinion rather than necessarily a data point at this time. And that obviously I'm taking into consideration. Chair, I also think that it was rather shocking to me to hear the response from the planning manager at the lack of interaction with the property that was closest to Field 5. In fact, a sort of dismissal that it's only a small scheme anyway in the scheme of things, which I think is not actually terribly encouraging for any of the residents. I thought there was an element of arrogance, I'm afraid, in that attitude. And it is not beyond my understanding of the technical abilities for that electrical paraphernalia, as it were, to be moved to another part of the site, and found some balance that was more amenable to the near neighbours. I also, we need to be aware as an authority that we're likely to be lobbied by CPRE at one end and WINAC at the other. But as elected councillors, we need to think about the residents of the wards that are impacted. And again, despite supposed support, that has come from people not necessarily who are going to, not necessarily in the area, who are going to have to absorb the activities of this particular development. And in my view, it's less than temporary nature for the next 40 years. So, Chair, I think this is perhaps one of many that we're all going to receive as councillors regarding the balance of solar farms and the impact on the local area. And I'm disappointed that we haven't had a better resolution for the residents locally with the overall plan that could go forward. And I am very sympathetic to many of the comments that have been made this morning to us. And as I say, Chair, in my view, not all of it is based on data. Some of it is based on opinion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reid.
Chairman, I'll try not to reiterate what's already been said by many others. The one thing I will say is this is the most comprehensive report on this subject that I've ever seen. When we did the Southwark Park one, it was half the size. Maybe we are learning as we go through with each application. There are little bits and pieces that we need to be done. Consultation, again, you heard what I said during the public session. It's not, because it's a small application in their side, it's a large application to the local residents. This is low-grade land. It has limited use, grazing being probably the most one. It needs to be managed. And what the problem I can foresee is that concrete has to be brought to the site. Now, I'm just trying to wonder how a vehicle carrying concrete is going to transfer its load to a smaller one. I don't know. But nonetheless, where the majority of the cabins are going to be placed directly in front of the historic residence, is sad, very sad. It needs thinking about, and I understand that if that was to change, a new application would have to be put in. But nonetheless, it is sad that they chose that place directly in front of the house itself to put all the cabins, or at least the majority of them. The concrete that's going to be the foundations, we don't know anything about. It's something that's got to be settled later as part of the conditions. Going back to the grazing of the land, I was talking to a sheep farmer literally only last night, and the reason put forward by the Southwark estate was they're going to have sheep that will graze around the units. Doesn't work. Sheep, according to the farmer, have to be checked on a daily basis. And you try finding sheep in amongst an area of that size with all the obstacles where they can quite happily hide. So that's not a practical situation. As far as glare is concerned, I think at a previous planning application some years ago, we had a member here who was actually in that particular field. That was his skill. And he said, if you're getting glare off of one of these panels, it's not working properly. So glare should not become a problem, because if it does, it's not producing the electricity. So that is it. I cannot see, unfortunately, a reason for turning this application down. As it's already been stated, we are in a situation that if you don't agree to applications like this. And I think Councillor Pearson said it many years ago, what are you going to do without your phone, your car, your television? It's unfortunately the sadness of life, but equally so, we need the land for the production of food, because too much food has to be imported. And I can't see that altering to our benefit. So with that, Chair, I will support the application.
Thank you. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chair. That was quick. Just put my hand up. Addressing climate change is one of the top priorities for this country, and it is the responsibility extends down to through district councils and down to individuals. This district needs at least a 6-fold increase in solar capacity to meet the district's climate change targets. A 6-fold increase is beyond the scale of using roofs, so on, through the district. And in that respect, we have to look at solar farms to address the climate change needs, the local generation of power that we all expect to have going forwards. This is not the first application that we've had, and it will certainly not be the last. I foresee many more like this. However, when we approve schemes like this, and schemes are put forward, we must ensure that they do not have a detrimental impact on our environment. In common with comments from my fellow councillors, I am disappointed that the impact on the immediate neighbours of this particular scheme has not been completely thought through, and the location of some of the equipment, I believe, could have been better placed. And I would urge any future schemes that come forwards that our officers are well aware that immediate local impact must be taken into account, and to bring with the developers schemes that really address that very local need as well as the wider environmental needs. In this case, I believe the wider scheme has been thought through well, and the impact on the broader environment has been taken into account. I believe this solar farm will add much needed capacity to our local energy generation. And in common with my fellow councillors opposite there, I also believe this is a really comprehensive report, and I thank the officers for the thoroughness and completeness of the documents that have been brought before us today. In summary, I will be supporting their recommendation.
Thank you, and I can see no more hands up, so I think everything has been said, really, but even so, I'm still going to have my little say. It is very difficult because we can all see the justification in the residents' views, but I agree with my colleague, Councillor Reid, that this is one of the most comprehensive reports I have seen on solar farms. And I know that Stephen Cornwall and Rob Green have spent endless hours on it, and where they don't have the expertise, they've brought in consultants like the Glinton Glare consultants. And I know that Stephen has probably viewed it from every single public viewpoint that you could, and has spent sort of hours walking around the site. It is very large, but as a positive result of that, it's going to provide 5,500 hours of electricity per year. It's also going to provide biodiversity, 15 biodiversity enhancements, and it's being kept in the natural fields. So although it is large, it will be contained within the fields, and where possible, they've minimised the gaps. There is one extra gap going up on the main road, which is unavoidable because they're changing the entrance. We've all been on the site visit and we've listened to and read all the information and the objections that have been put forward. It won't be that visible. And if it is visible, you tend to sort of let it blend in with what's around it. It's not countryside and it's not farming land anymore. That's the change. But I feel that we can't miss this opportunity of providing this solar farm. So I am going to support it. Now this application has been recommended for approval with the changes on our update sheet. So there are changes to condition 7, the bridge, and they are not keeping the deer out. They are, but they don't want them to be trapped in the fenced off areas. The working hours, condition 18, has been altered so that there's no noise on Saturday afternoons. I actually spoke to a farmer at the weekend about the noise issue, and he said there isn't a noise coming out of it. Sometimes a low hum, but it depends on the weather, but not a noise that will affect you. And then the informative 15 has been changed, and I didn't catch what it was. So, Julie, do you want to add in anything I've missed?
Chairman, would you like to summarise? Would that help? So the recommendation, as you say, is on page 79 through to page 92. I would just say, in terms of the legal agreement, we've set out the heads of terms, and we would obviously ask this committee to delegate the final agreement of that legal agreement to your service lead legal and your service lead myself, built environment. In terms of the conditions, you say the update sheet sets out some changes to conditions 7 and 18. And then also, as we heard, I suggested earlier, in condition 26, we just add a note in there to link it to informative 15. The update sheet then also suggests additional informatives 13, 14 and 15, with that amendment in informative 15 that we say furthest rather than closest, and it was just transposed. And that's your recommendation, Chair, before you today. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that information, this application has been recommended for approval. Will all those in favour of approval please show? Thank you. And those against? And no abstentions, I don't think, no. So thank you, that application has been approved. Thank you to the members of the public for your tolerance in having such a long session. And many thanks again to the 2 case officers and people who've contributed all the information to the report. Please don't forget the sheet which you can get outside if you haven't got one, of any suggestions that you might have for improvement. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I'm afraid we haven't finished. We've got one more item to go, but we will just wait for people to go if they want to. And we're moving on to agenda item 7.
In it to change
Ready, are we? Okay, so we move on to agenda item 7, which is the last item on our agenda this morning. So if you're not waiting for that, then you're too early, because we will resume at 2 o'clock. So this is 22-02256/FUL, and it's a pedestrian gate to be inserted between the outer brick wall of 5 Lockburn Place and St Cross Garage, opening inwards, providing access to the pavement behind the new recessed parking area on Cripstead Lane. It's in St Cross Road, 5 Lockburn Place, and the case officer is Kat Watson. So when you're ready, Kat, we're ready to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to draw members' attention to an error on page 7 of the update sheet. This is item number 7, 5 Lockburn Place, but the update for this item was actually put onto the first paragraph update of item 10, which is the Haven. So I just wanted that was some comments from Mr. Chris Kirby, who's pointed out some issues with some of the drawings in the presentation pack. So I just wanted to make members aware of that. That error there. So the application is for the insertion of a new pedestrian gate into the boundary, the new boundary wall of the Goodworth House development, which is a development of 7 new dwellings, which committee heard and permitted over a year ago now. The person that's bought plot number 5, which you will see just on the in the yellow box on the screen. I think I've got it. The members will see. Members will see on the screen there in the hatched area is the site of plot 7, plot 5. Excuse me for a moment. So yes, that is the property that's under construction, and the applicant wishes to install a pedestrian gate in there. So here is the existing and proposed site plan. The top diagram problems with this. Yes, the top diagram is the existing Cripstead Lane. So the access will come out once the whole site is addressed as St Cross Road. The new access will be on Cripstead Lane, and the top diagram shows that there is where the blue line is, that will be where the gate will be inserted into the wall there. The bottom diagram shows again in blue dashed 3 new parking spaces in a lay-by, which doesn't form part of the red line site for the overall Goodworth House development, but is land that the applicant has the original planning consent set aside for use for local residents to help alleviate some of the parking issues on Cripstead Lane. So here is the proposed parking plan. So we've got the space for 3 vehicles, and in the wall you'll see, so just to the top of where the vehicle spaces are, that will be where the new gate will be installed.
Sorry, Chair, just to explain, we are having a bit of trouble with the transition of the slides. I think there's been a delay. Have you pressed?
Yeah, it won't, yeah, apologies. It won't go to the next slide.
And we may just have to reset the presentation. Will you bear with us a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chairman, while we're having just this informal break, the quality of the slides being put up are not terribly good. And for members of the public, unless their eyesight's a lot better than me, are very difficult to identify. I know there's always a 5% or 10% loss from computer through one of these boxes, but
I think, Chair, it's because the lighting above the screen, as opposed to our television screen that we look at, is so I've just asked Matthew to switch off some of the lighting at this end.
Turning the lights off.
Does that improve the screen view? Does that improve it, Councillor Reid? No?
No, I don't think it's the light.
it's not the lighting, it's just the quality has been lost through the transfer, electronic transfers. And normally it's up to about 10%, but this obviously seems to be a lot more than 10%.
Think about it.
No, Chair, it's not. It's out of our control, Chair. That's why we've got the papers, you know, in your electronic packs as well. And these plans are on the website. So this presentation sort of is an aid memoir today. We can't improve the quality that comes up on the large screen. I'm afraid it's out of our control.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So would you like me to start again, or are you happy to start from this slide? From this slide, okay. So here we've got the proposed parking spaces. As I was saying, they have been, the land has been provided by the developer for the use of members of the public, not people within the new site particularly, but anyone that lives in the area to park, as there is a known parking problem in this part of St Cross. And here we can see the proposed gate. This is the new dwelling that's being built at the moment. You can just see that. And then there's going to be a brick wall along the boundary. And the gate will be inserted into that. Here we've got some photographs. So these photographs both show, at the moment there's a sort of corrugated metal wall with a pair of wooden gates. This is going to be replaced by a brick wall as part of the development. You'll see also on the right hand side of the photographs, that's the St Cross garage, which is next to the site. And you'll also see here that there is a lay-by, but it's in the road. It's not set back, and that makes it difficult for people to park and manoeuvre and so on. So here we have again the top left photograph, just showing the end of the St Cross garage, the green gates, and then the start of the corrugated fencing. The proposed gate, once the brick wall is built, will be approximately where the green gates end and the corrugated fencing starts. And the bottom right hand photograph just gives a slightly wider view of Cripstead Lane and the context of the site. Yes, Chair, sorry, apologies for this.
Come to a halt again over the change of slides, I think. We do have, in our pack, we do have, the photos, don't we? Right.
Thank you, Chair. This actually is my final slide. So just to conclude, the application is for the insertion of a pedestrian gate into the brick boundary wall of the wider development of the Goodworth House development. This gate will open out onto the new parking spaces, which are to be recessed from where the current parking spaces on Cripstead Lane are, and it's to allow access for the applicant from the rear of her house onto the street. It's for pedestrian access only, and not for vehicle access. And so my recommendation is to permit, subject to the conditions and informatives contained within my report. I'm happy to answer any questions, and apologies for the technical difficulties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That takes us to the public speaking. Could I just point out an error that seems to have been made in that on our update sheets? I'm talking to the committee. Page 7, the paragraph which is under number 10, which says update email from Chris Kirby and so on, is actually in the wrong section. It should be in this section under number 7, 5 Lockburn Place. Just that first paragraph, okay? So we have public speaking. Now, I've got 4 names down, but I've got an indication that Andrew Scott is not speaking today, is that right? You're not speaking? No. So I've got Anne Jones, Peter Eagling and Tim Venters sharing the 3-minute objector slot, unless you're going to say one person can use it or 2 people. Yes, that's up to you entirely. There's 3 minutes allocated to the objector spot, and you can use it how you like. So whoever is speaking, would you like to come forward to the public participation? I'm awfully sorry, I can't hear you without a microphone.
Put the microphone and the chair won't hear you otherwise.
Just sit down. Yes.
You can say that now.
I'm sure you are allowed to say whatever it is that you
Whatever
want
it
to
is
say.
I'm trying to, yes. That we didn't understand the system, that we had to send the photographs in and get them verified.
Right, yeah.
So on Kat's, one of Kat's things, yes, that one was part of ours, or at least half of it was part of our submission. Have we got the other ones verified? Yeah. Thank you very much.
So they weren't lost, just that you can't.
Or they
say
arrived
them
in
today.
time. Or we didn't
Oh,
do the
right.
wrong thing.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. So those are the photographs on the screen.
Well, that's one of them. Yes, we had
Got others.
we
to
had
work out,
three,
have
we
you?
had 3.
We've also got this slide, Chair, and this one, another one, and that's it. So those are all the slides that I received from objectors to be included.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you have 3 minutes.
Yes.
The clock will come up on the screen and I'll have to stop you at the end of 3 minutes. So when you're ready.
I strongly reject this planning application. I'm the owner of St Cross Garage where we carry out servicing repairs, but next door to where the proposed gate is to go to the property. The concealed gate in this area, however, has not been in use for the last 33 years that I've owned the garage. The gate is not needed as access of right of way for maintenance, and Alfred Homes are currently installing a door at the back of my property. The valuable tools and equipment that are kept in my garage are essential to our livelihood, and I feel they're at risk having a gate there that people can climb over and access the back of the buildings. If the gate were permitted, a wall is far more secure. It also allows access into Cripstead Lane, but we were reassured by Alfred Homes that there would be no access onto Cripstead Lane. Otherwise, they would not have allowed the rear entrance to be installed, and I strongly object to the housing application. I would like to thank you.
This is a small item, I think, a gate. Thank you. It's a small item. It is the consequences of the gate that are important. Any use, we support Tim Spheres. A gate at 7'9" is 15 inches lower than a 9-foot brick wall and much more vulnerable. Any user looking the gate looks directly into the sitting room of the cottage opposite. The undertaking of only occasional use is valueless. Use changes. Vehicular deliveries would block the lane and cause our former...
You're Catherine Brill, and you're the applicant, and you're supporting the application.
Yes.
You have 3 minutes, and when you're ready, the clock will start with you.
Good afternoon. This application is quite straightforward. We are moving to Winchester and buying a new house with a back door from a utility room that leads onto a narrow L-shaped passage, which is a dead end. We want our back door to be useful, which requires a gate onto Cripstead Lane. This would be for occasional use to bring a muddy dog and our muddy boots straight into the utility room, rather than having to walk right through the house, which is the only other alternative. This pedestrian access is for one house, designed for 2 people to live in, and would open onto a pavement behind the new recessed parking area. It would not be used for utilities, deliveries, or access to parking, as this is not necessary or even convenient for our property. It would not cause any problems or inconvenience for any neighbouring properties or parked vehicles. The proposed gate would be properly secured with a lock and bolts, and we would take advice on any other appropriate security measures. This application does not create a planning precedent, as there was a large double gate in this position prior to the housing development. It conforms to all relevant planning policy, plans and guidance. We know that the housing development has never been popular in the immediate neighbourhood, which we understand. The objection to this application seems to be a continuation of this concern. It is disproportionate to the degree of hazard that allowing pedestrian access to one property could ever cause. It has been quite distressing for us that this simple and reasonable request for a pedestrian gate should have caused any negative reaction. We hope that the committee, with its greater detachment and broader perspective, will appreciate that there are no planning reasons why this application should not be approved, that you will realise that the new recessed parking bay improves the safety of Cripstead Lane for both pedestrians and vehicles, that you will agree with your own heritage conservation report, which states that overall this development improves the look of this part of St Cross by replacing a long stretch of corrugated iron fence with a brick wall, and that this application for a pedestrian gate is a minor change to which there should be no objection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before you go, and you've sort of nearly gone, there might be questions of clarification for you. Councillor Edwards.
Just, excuse me, one clarification.
you already have access, or you will have, through another aspect of your property. You've talked about putting security locks and bolts on this gate. Do you intend to have any bell or intercom system or such like installed on this gate so that it could be used by callers to your house?
Absolutely not. I mean, our access is via the front door, which is in Lockburn Place. There is no access to our back door in any other way from anywhere. It's a complete dead end. And blocks would have a brick wall at either end. There's absolutely no plan to put, we're not putting any bell or anything on there. It's just not intended for that use at all. And actually it's not practical because it's a very narrow passageway. It's only 1 metre wide. It's L-shaped. So actually it's not very practical for any of that purpose anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just clarify? I think you made reference to a previous access point there, a gate.
Yes.
But obviously we can't see that on the current pictures necessarily because of the other.
It was the green, double green bit at the end of the photograph that was shown was actually a gate. But I mean, the residents have made a point that it was not used very much. I understand. So I mean, so that it wasn't used, but there was a gate there. That's the only.
Thank you. I think that's it for any other questions. So if you'd like to return to your seat, and thank you very much for coming along today. Kat, anything you want to expand on what you've heard?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify with the previous questions about if there's going to be any intercom or anything else, notwithstanding what the applicant has said, condition 3, which is on page 134 of the agenda, does require a detailed specification of the proposed gate, including photographs of the specific product, to be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority prior to the commencement of works. So if there were any concerns about sort of paraphernalia around the gate, then that can be dealt with in this condition. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chair. Kent, and in the report, the City of Winchester Trust statement in there talks about that during the original planning application, process and amendments were made responding to concerns about access onto that road in the back of the development. I don't know that previous planning application and the agreement. Could you just outline what the concerns were at the time?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I think most people here today are aware, Cripstead Lane is a very narrow road. So Faiths Road, which runs to the rear of the larger site, also has problems with parking. That's part of the reason why the developer, as part of the larger scheme, has sacrificed some land so that local residents can park in a safe manner. There was a condition on the original consent which removed permitted development for several different items. One of these items was for gates, fences, walls, etc. That wasn't to say that these items would not be acceptable, but it was to give planning officers and yourselves control over what type of this gate would be acceptable. So yes, I think obviously local residents are concerned because they know that the surrounding area has trouble with parking, but this gate is just pedestrian. I think people have mentioned before where the new parking spaces will be. There's an area of pavement behind it.
that is not pavement as Hampshire Highways would understand it. They would have objected if they thought it was. It's purely just for people to get out of their car, and the maximum width of that pavement is about 0.7 meters. So you couldn't use it to walk by. It's literally just an access. So I don't think there would be any sort of safety issues. You know, for people using the gate, they couldn't put a bin there or anything like that. So I think that hopefully explains a little bit about the wider situation and why the gate is acceptable. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Just at the parking, which I realise is not directly part of this application, but relates closely to it. The word lay-by is used, which I sort of associate with country roads, but what we're talking about in an urban context is 3 parking spaces. On page 133, it says there will be no restriction on who can use this lay-by, and yet I believe it's currently part of a residence permit scheme. So is anything going to change?
Thank you, Chair. The proposed lay-by is not on highway land, it's on land owned by the developer, hence why it's recessed back from the road. As part of the wider development, the developer is in liaison with the County Council with regards to a Section 278 agreement, which applies to the whole development, so vehicular accesses onto St Cross Road and pedestrian accesses onto the pavements. This has been discussed with Hampshire Highways. They didn't raise any objection to the proposed parking spaces. Obviously, it will provide access onto the road from people getting out of their car, but the actual lay-by itself is on private land. And as I said earlier, the small area of, I hesitate to call it pavement, but it sort of is a pavement that people will be able to get out to, passengers would be able to get out of their car. At no time has it been suggested that that would be a pavement in the definition, within the definition that Hampshire County Council Highways would accept, and they have indicated that they're happy with that. I hope that helps. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. When this originally came to the Planning Committee, it was a very contentious application in the first place, and that parking was part of that way of making it acceptable. And we also, from what I remember, put on the permitted development restrictions because we didn't want any side doors being put in or gates being put in on that area. So this is going totally against what we originally considered for the planning application. And I think we should think very hard before we go any further with this, because I hope that you can clarify the change in thoughts.
Chair, with your permission, if I could just remind members that on the previous application, I think Kat explained, didn't she, that we did remove permitted development rights, which means that you can't, when you remove permitted development rights, you can't say somebody can't ever have something in the future. What you do in terms of imposing that condition is it enables you to say that development that would otherwise be permitted, i.e. not require planning permission, should come before the local planning authority for determination. And that's what we have in front of us today. A condition wouldn't prevent that happening. It just means it needs planning permission. And now you're in a position, Chair, as decision makers, you have to make a planning decision, a planning judgment. It's not acceptable just to say, well, we've got a blanket ban on that. You have to look at your own policies. You have to look at whether there's material planning harm in reaching your decision. So your officers have concluded on our assessment that there isn't any harm sufficient to warrant a reason for refusal, hence our recommendation to you to approve. That's the recommendation for you today. If you were, that's how your thought process and your assessment would have to work, Chair. So I think it's important, I say you can't have a blanket ban. You can require development to come forward that would otherwise be permitted and make that assessment here today, Chair.
Thank you. I was really concerned with the fact that this development has hardly been finished yet. So therefore we're changing the application straight away.
And I think, Chair, I'd say that you've heard from the applicant as to their reasons for that. They're obviously the prospective or already purchaser. I don't know the situation there. And, you know, each case on its merits, and you have to consider what comes before you and make a planning judgment.
Thank you. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chair. Just building on my previous question and the answer you just given, Mrs. Bennett. I'm not familiar with the area. I wasn't familiar with the original case, and I can't see the information I need in the diagrams here. So this is an application from number 5 for a gate out through that wall. I understand that. Are there other properties that are in a similar position? So I don't have the layout here. So would this create a precedent, if you like, we admit it, or a number of other properties to apply for further gates along that side? I'm only asking the question because it's not visible to me on the diagrams.
Thank you, Chair. There aren't any other properties within the wider development that are so close to the boundary. Plot 5 in particular was a slightly unusual plot. The layout of the entire scheme evolved over time through pre-application and also the planning application. Because of we are in a conservation area and there are some nearby listed buildings, impact on the historical environment was a very key issue. And so how it evolved was that rather than having a more traditional sort of brick and flint or brick house as the rest of the development has, plot 5 is a sort of fairly contemporary flat roofed bungalow type of development, and which was determined that it would be much less impactful on the conservation area. So just as a result of that change of layout and to integrate it within the wider scheme, that's why it's relatively more close to the boundary. The other dwellings, we've got large buildings to the front of the plot, which is onto St Cross Road, so that was acceptable to be set slightly further back. And the properties at the rear, which front onto St Faith's Road, again, they've got their own enclosed garden. They do have a boundary with St Faith's Road, but they're not in such close proximity. So I hope that helps. Thank you, Chair.
So, I'm sorry it's so loud. Shall we have questions on any other aspects? So that includes principal development. It all starts on page 130. South Downs National Park. The historic environment is quite a lengthy assessment. Neighbouring amenities, sustainable transport, or anything else in the conditions that you want to ask questions on. If not, we'll move into debate. Councillor Rutter.
Thank you, Chair. I think with due respect to the objectors, I do think that this is actually an entirely reasonable suggestion. The resident of number 5 simply wants access onto the lane so that they can come in and out of their back door, and there seems to be no other way that they can use their back door other than just to access the short, small space behind the house. They're suggesting a completely anonymous gate, well locked. And I'm sure that they're as concerned about the security of this gate as any of the other neighbouring residents or businesses, and would be concerned that if it wasn't secure. So I'm sure that it's very much in their interest to make it so. There's no opportunity for deliveries here. As I say, it's going to be an anonymous gate, so only the resident will be using it. And I'm quite happy that the report that clearly shows that we thought about this very carefully, and are happy in terms of planning reasons that it's acceptable. And so on that basis, I will be supporting the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Pearson.
Sure. When I look at this, I'm a bit staggered. Actually, it's come before the committee. It strikes me it's a combination of silo thinking, that whoever's decided first there should be a parking bay at that point, other than what is there now. First question is, why is the parking lot there now immediately around a corner, which strikes me as incredibly dangerous? Safer to have the bay, but then at the same time is restricting access, which, judging by what has been said by Mrs. Brill, access into a narrow corridor with a bend in it, which is an immediate security situation. I mean, whoever thought that solution to a back door, well, really should think again as whether they're the right occupation, quite frankly. I have no objection to this application at all, but I would also suggest strongly that someone says to the developer that high bay should not be there. Indeed, parking shouldn't be there anyway, because the footpath's gone. Yes, I know that's what I mean about silo thinking, Councillor Rutter. If we are trying to reduce the amount of cars, what is that parking? Well, what is the parking there for? Why the parking bay is there now? Because it's on a dangerous corner. So you put a parking bay which removes the pavement. Well, you would have set it there, let the cars park on the pavement, which is verging on the illegal. The fact still remains is those parking there has created a very dangerous situation for the Brills. And I understand what the objector's saying, because they're saying there's a security situation there. As I say, it's silo thinking. Frankly, if we say no to this, and as Councillor Rutter says, it is a doorway which makes access into that house, albeit a backless, a darn sight safer than it presently is. Surely, I think a bit perverse to say no to this. So I agree with the decision, although I must admit I'm staggered. The college in biodiversity. Sometimes it's transport. Well, it's to me it's open and closed case. It's either that or it's a Shakespearean play, which I recall is called Much Ado About Nothing.
Thank you. Councillor Laming.
I've given this back to consideration, but unlike Councillor Pearson Rutter, I think that it is inappropriate to have a gate there. It should have been thought about at the time the parking space was put in as a sup to the local people to help them find parking spaces in there, because it was already really restricted. It's the internal layout of the actual houses themselves which are at fault. And I think the gate will have a detrimental effect on the neighbourhood, so I shan't be supporting them.
Thank you. So we've now come to the vote. This application has been recommended for approval because it accords with policy CP20 of Local Plan Part 1 and several policies 15, 16, 17 and 27 of Local Plan Part 2. All those in favour of approving this application, please show. And those against? Thank you. So that application is approved.
I think it was 8. It was 8. Can you ask for 4 again?
Yes, could we just check those in favour of approving this application? Yes.
So,
And those against? Makes 9. Thank you. So that application is approved. Now, members, we were due to start again at 2, Would you like to have an hour or would you prefer to start at 2? It's your choice. 2? And we are having lunch in the Wintonian Bar, which is down on the ground floor and got its heating, first floor, got its heating on, has it? Yes, thank you.